The ending of the book completely pissed her off. She didn't think the outcome would be so sad. It was a fantasy novel inspired by 19th century England called The Queen's Consort. The main male character, whom she really liked, met his death in the end. He was a devoted servant of Queen Hergé and devoted his powers to satisfying her desires. But as a reward for his loyalty, he received only a cup of poison, which ended his life. Edwin breathed his last and sank into eternal darkness, and this wording irritated her even more. What was the point of his death when at least a little compassion could have been shown? She sat in front of the torn book, burning with rage, but then an idea came to her. A lover of books and art, she decided to write down everything that she felt was missing in the work. This is how the fanfic about the Queen's Consort appeared, marked 18+. In the original book, the hero was made too pathetic, so she decided to fill in his shortcomings with her imagination. At the same time, she added more debauchery, and readers appreciated her provocative work. But not the original author, who noted that she should have asked permission before publishing the Johari fanfic. She read the message, and after a moment, her consciousness suddenly became clouded, and soon she felt crushed, as if the world had turned upside down. After a moment, she realized that the sensations were becoming more vivid, but she did not understand what was happening around her. There was a strange feeling, her chest was constricted, and voices were heard nearby that she did not perceive at all. Meanwhile, the carriage was moving in the given direction, and there were people in it. Fanning herself with an overly ornate fan, the middle-aged woman complained that this old junk could hardly be called a carriage. She then declared that the cart was so old and useless that it resembled her father, looking straight into the eyes of the new convert. Why she suddenly felt crushed can be understood if you look at the situation. Looking at her, the now quite elderly woman asked what she was staring at. It was Viscountess Catherine Wentworth, a typical stepmother, and her daughters were sitting next to her, and she addressed her by the name of Henri. The woman asked, displeased, if she didn't like the bad words about her so-called father. The new convert, who no longer remembered her name, was a typical stepdaughter suffering because of her stepmother. No flights of fancy, she thought. The rapid transition from one world to another, however, did not leave her too confused, and she replied that if the woman liked this carriage, she should learn to spend her money wisely. The woman was about to join in the upcoming argument, but was stopped by her older sister, Candace Wentworth, who said that she needed a new dress for the upcoming ball. At this time, Middle Eunice sat and thought about how she had not had any new dresses for a long time, but she was not used to complaining out loud. Candace reminded him in a nasty voice that there was a ball soon, organized by the Duke of Bristol, the most eligible bachelor in the kingdom, who was looking for a bride. The new Henri thought that she had little chance in this regard. Everything that was happening was similar to her favorite novel, where the Duke was the favorite husband of the Queen. She thought to herself that they shouldn't even dream about it. This most eligible bachelor had no time for marriage. Duke Bristol, named Edwin Asker in the book, is one of the most influential men in the kingdom, dedicated to serving Queen Hergé, the very same book about which she decided to remake in her fanfic, in order to reveal the character more deeply. However, in the end, he will be betrayed, which is how he will meet his end. Everything was too well known and simple. The doomed protagonist, her favorite character, the one she spent so many hours fan-fictioning about. But now even the thought of him frightened her, because she found herself in his world. And yet this handsome, sexy main character was about to kill her. The Wentworth family, to whom the main character now belonged, was hardly mentioned in the story. Her biological father, Viscount Wentworth, led a rebellion against Queen Hergé, who would have thought? And he was killed by Edwin, her husband and right-hand man, and this was the only time the entire family was mentioned in history. So, at first, she didn't understand where she was and who she was at all. At that moment, the carriage stopped. The stepmother asked if they had arrived already, but Candace noted that they were still in the forest. Henri remembered that the Viscount's daughter was called Henrietta, but her stepmother called her Hay and sent her to see what the coachman was doing. Trying to stay calm, she immediately left. She didn't like being in the same space with these people, so it was better to leave. She called out to the coachman, whose name was Handel, asking what had happened and why they had stopped. He began to explain that Marilyn, their horse, had suddenly started acting strange. Then Henri looked ahead. In front of them was a carriage, in which a thoroughbred horse was harnessed. It was driven by a coachman, but it was still unclear why the carriage had stopped. At that moment, a man who had not yet been seen came out of the carriage. He was quite stately, which made Henri feel a little embarrassed, and besides, he was in no hurry to introduce himself. Addressing Henri as you, the man adjusted his short black gloves, after which he asked a question. He asked who owned the mare that was harnessed to their carriage. However, Henri was somewhat confused, since she had not yet seen male people of that time. He was a tall and elegant man. One could immediately tell that he was a nobleman of high rank. She replied that she was the owner of the mare, and introduced herself by her full name, calling herself Henrietta Wentworth. There was a pause during which the man should have given his name if he had been well brought up. However, he simply pierced her with his gaze, without saying a word. Henri thought to herself that he was looking at her too hard, and it was rude of him not to introduce himself. Then she decided to ask herself if she could find out his name, to which she received a calm silence. The coachman, who was standing next to her at the time, tried to calm their mare. The man spoke, saying in a dry voice that their mare was in heat. This was said rather shamelessly. Henri did not expect such a thing and was slightly shocked by such frankness. However, he calmly stated that their mare wanted his stallion. He then asked if they could move her aside so he could pass. Then he declared that his horse was of an elite breed and could not mate with just anyone. Henri was amazed that he actually said that out loud. She had already thought to herself that maybe he wanted to quarrel with her, but he seemed quite calm. She asked Handel if this was true, since she herself did not understand the peculiarities of the sexual behavior of horses. He replied that this was most likely the case. They had recently tried to mate Marilyn, but she refused the stallion, and even when everything was swollen, she stubbornly stood her ground. She had kept it all to herself since then, and now she was even more excited than she should have been, Handel said resignedly. Henri thought, well, let it be so, but still, how could this man speak like that about her beloved girl? She turned to the mare, trying to calm her down with words that if Marilyn wanted it, why not? However, she also said out loud that one should not judge by first impressions. The inner world of many men does not correspond to their appearance. Then she said that the way he looks doesn't mean he's worth anything. He might just be unbearable. Henri said that he might be just a playboy, but nevertheless praised her mare. Ignoring the sideways glance the man gave her, she continued that she was glad, in any case, that Marilyn had been able to express her feelings. She then told him that she was sorry that their horse had been a little rough. They would immediately step aside, and then asked if he needed anything else. The man chuckled and said that she had probably misunderstood him, so he wanted to clear the situation up. Kirsten, unlike others, is a refined and noble stallion of royal descent. He is on a completely different level from the ordinary horses you meet on the road. He has a professional guard, special food, and premium housing. Owners of prized horse breeds from all over the world line up to let their mare spend the night with him. He also said that he doubted that his paths with Marilyn were ever meant to cross, which was unfortunate. Henri noted that he was probably a rather busy man, but still personally looked after his pets, a commendable pedantry and responsibility. He replied that it was his duty as the owner. The verbal altercation had gone too far. The grooms were already worried that this would not end well and were waiting for someone to stop them. However, at that moment, someone called out Henri's name loudly, causing her to turn around. Her stepmother asked her why it was taking her so long, and Henri thought to herself that the annoying people had shown up. At that moment, she noticed a handsome man who appeared right in front of them. The stepmother lamented what her little wretch was doing, and thoughtfully asked who this gentleman could be. The man did not answer, saying that they had already been too late, and then asked for forgiveness for having to take his leave. The mother asked Henri what had happened, who this man was, to which she received the answer that it did not matter. However, she said he did not reveal his name, so she could not name him. She thought to herself that he had been very unlucky and had stepped in horse manure when leaving them. 2 weeks later, the entire household was going about their business when a carriage drove up. Judging by his clothes, a footman or butler emerged from it and loudly greeted the owners. He looked rather prim, but it was immediately obvious that he was very efficient. He handed Henri a paper stating that a person wanted to buy Marilyn. The letter stated that it was Kirsten's owner, but there was still no name. He stated that the payment would be more than generous. In addition, he brought all the necessary documents. The stepmother was stunned by how much they were willing to pay for the horse. In her dreams, she had already bought a new carriage and 5 horses for this money, and was also thinking about where else she could spend the rest. And Henri thought for a moment. It turns out that that gentleman suddenly wanted to buy Marilyn. It was somehow strange. However, the stepmother heard her quiet cry and asked again if it was really that man. The butler said that they should not worry about Marilyn's condition. His master guarantees good care. The stepmother had already clapped her hands, but Henri gave a firm no, after which she declared that she would not sell it, which puzzled her new mother. She had already started shouting at her, but the butler asked the reason for the refusal. Henri thought that this was a completely stupid question. She was ready to flare up. Then I remembered how that man looked down on Marilyn and called her a mare, and now he wants to buy her. She told the butler that the gentleman had not even honored her by coming here himself, and how could she trust him after all this, since there was no guarantee that he would take care of their horse. The butler very diplomatically stated that, nevertheless, Kirsten would be ideal for Marilyn, and it was not worth rejecting him completely. Henri was furious about this. She said that they only talk about how prestigious their horses are, but for her, Marilyn is not just a horse. She stated that she is like a little sister to her, and no amount of money would make her sell out a member of her family, especially to someone who didn't even introduce himself. After which she added that perhaps she would change her decision under one condition. If Kirsten's owner came in person and begged her to sell her, perhaps she would agree. The butler realized that he had failed and would most likely be finished off, but he said out loud that he would definitely convey her words to the owner. Looking at the groom leaving, the stepmother thought that they couldn't just let him leave after such a proposal, after which she screamed at Henri that she had completely lost her mind, because this money could have gone into her older sister's dowry. Henri coldly replied that if he really needed this horse so urgently, he would come himself. However, the mother was not reassured by these words. A man with such wealth would never bother himself with a trip to a god-forsaken countryside for the sake of a single horse. Henri said that since he was willing to pay a fortune for her, he seemed very desperate. The stepmother was beside herself. She considered this girl to be so impudent, but she could not do anything with her. While sipping her tea, Henri wondered if he would really come in any case. This question did not bother her much. The butler returned back when it was already completely dark. As he expected, he received less than flattering comments about his work. The handsome man said he had sent him on a special errand, but all he had done was deliver a message to him. After which he asked if he really still wanted to be called his butler. Kirsten had been acting restless and screaming for 2 weeks straight. The man thought that it was impossible for the mare to be okay. It was just stubbornness, or this girl had an ace up her sleeve. However, if things are left as they are, Kirsten's health will suffer, and this will all grow into a significant problem. This girl is really something, but it looks like he will have to agree to her terms. At this moment, the butler Albert looked at him with concern, asking what he wanted to do. However, the answer surprised him, because he really was going to go to this wilderness. The man said that he couldn't show up unprepared, so he needed to do a few things. The next day, he appeared near the estate where the horse lived, which was not giving his horse any peace. He couldn't see what was happening outside the windows, but it was quite early. At this time, Henri was calmly reading a newspaper, lying in bed. This was her favorite pastime. However, there was a knock that interrupted her. She put down the newspaper and allowed someone to come in. It was her maid. She seemed to be trembling all over, and Henri asked her why she was so nervous. The maid replied that the gentleman everyone in the house was talking about had arrived. He introduced himself as Kirsten's owner, without giving his name. Henri looked out the window and saw him approaching the doors of the mansion. She didn't expect him to come all the way to them, so he really was desperate. The conversation at the table didn't go well at first. Everyone was choosing their words carefully. Henri looked at the guest. She had already managed to dress in a simple blue dress. The stepmother and the eldest daughter were on edge, as they thought they had a good chance of changing their fate. The whole family was in the room with the guest, but the silence dragged on. Then he began by saying that his sudden visit must have discouraged them. Henri wanted to answer, but at that moment her stepmother started chattering. She told him not to worry. Last time he left without even saying hello, she was very sorry. Now she can finally accept him as a guest, which makes her happy, and the eldest daughter thought that he was simply incredibly beautiful. The stepmother, in her usual repertoire, said that she would call it fate. Henri understood that she was most likely enjoying the situation because the man was indeed from a noble family. One replied that he appreciated their warm welcome, but he had traveled all night without rest to get here. After which, looking at Henri, he declared that he had come in person, as she had insisted. She only chuckled to this without answering anything, but she noticed that he grinned too. The guest asked if she was unhappy since he had made a pretty good offer. Looking at her somewhat defiantly, he seemed to want to say that she had succeeded in getting her way this time. Henry wondered if this was really what she was imagining at the moment. It felt like he wasn't exactly flirting, but rather challenging. However, here the stepmother entered the conversation again and said that his proposal was excellent, but Henri had just suddenly started being picky for no apparent reason. She thought to herself that before he had behaved narcissistically and arrogantly, but now, when the situation had become more tense, he had come to them himself. It was funny. And the behavior of these two irritated her what was so beautiful in him that she should admire him in such a way. The man had already decided to get straight to the point and asked if he could then look at Marilyn. The stepmother cried out, "Did he really want to go to the stall right now, after all? He had been on the road all night." Henry watched his reaction. He sat with his gloved hands clenched, but he was probably genuinely tired. The stepmother continued that he must be a very busy man. Henri added with deliberate indifference that he was so busy that he hadn't even taken off his gloves. He replied that as he had the impression that Mrs. Wentworth found his presence there inconvenient, he had thought it best to get things over with quickly, and so had not taken them off. Both her relatives suddenly cried out for him to take his time and to please them with his company a little longer. They told him to stay as long as he wanted, and the stepmother added that she had already ordered food to be prepared so that they could dine together. Suddenly, he decided to agree and went with them to the dining room. Henry found this behavior a little strange. Judging by his appearance, he really must be a very busy man. However, the table was a great success. Many treats had already been prepared and beautifully arranged. The servants managed to set the table while they were talking and added one more extra item. The stepmother did not stop talking, noting that no one had come to visit them for a long time, so it was so wonderful that he was here. She added that they lived in a very remote place and rarely had the chance to entertain such pleasant gentlemen. Then she behaved quite strangely and asked if their food was right for him. He showed quite secular restraint, declaring that everything was simply wonderful. However, it was clear that he was not inclined to long and empty conversations, but it was still worth having a bite to eat. The mother thought to herself that perhaps she would have a chance to marry her eldest daughter to a fine gentleman. However, Henri, putting the knife on the table, said that she suddenly understood something. He still hasn't introduced himself, so she can't call him by name. He simply remained silent without looking at her, apparently not considering it necessary to answer this question. Then Henri decided to do it her way, and asked if she could then call him Kirsten's father. Eunice choked. Everyone else froze in shock, but the man smiled slightly. Wiping his mouth, he said that it wasn't such a bad name, it was fine to use. After which he said that if she really wanted to be friends, he was not against it, then added that he was ready to talk to Marilyn's mother. Henri was a little taken aback, but it was quite sweet and also on point. She stated that depending on the situation, he could use that name, but at that moment her eldest daughter tried to pull her up, demanding that she stop this sarcasm. The man stood up and, putting on his gloves, said that since they had finished eating, could they please take him to the stables. The stepmother was upset that he did not want to stay with them longer, but Henri immediately agreed and said that she would be happy to see him off. She needed to go upstairs to change into her riding boots. At this moment, an unpleasant incident occurred that we would like to avoid. She heard the cry of her older sister, who did not expect to see her, and it was clear why. Henri was so irritated that she was ready to hit Candace. She asked why she was not in the stable yet. She had something strange in her hands. She tried to change the subject and asked where the gentleman was and why Henri was still there, to which she received the answer that she simply wanted to change her clothes. However, in the hands of the elder sister were lace gloves that belonged to Henri's mother. For a moment, she was stunned, as no one was allowed to touch them. She grabbed Candace and asked why she had them when they didn't belong to her. She replied that she took them because they were hanging out of Mrs. Branston's room. They were ownerless, they had no owner, and she could do with them as she wished. After which she stated that Henri had no right, as a younger sister, to be rude to her. She responded that Candace should watch her words. It was not Mrs. Branston who should have spoken, but the late Viscountess, and who said that they had no owner, they belonged to Henri's mother, which means they are hers now. And she who does not have a drop of blood with her has no right to claim them. Candace was furious, but she never gave in so easily. She screamed at Henri to choke on them and pushed her, her foot slipping off the step. The girl suddenly felt like she was about to fall. It was a pity that she had managed to reach the top. Already in flight, she thought that these gloves were still worth this quarrel. However, at that moment, Candace noticed a black-gloved hand outstretched, ready to catch Henri. The gentleman who came to them as a guest was able to hold her back, not giving Candace the opportunity to mourn her unloved younger sister. Henri wondered where he could have come from. He asked for forgiveness for his interference. After which, he said that if she did not want him to stay here until tomorrow, then she should hurry. Then he said that he would wait for her downstairs while she prepared to go to the stables. Candace realized that she didn't look her best, but she blamed Henri for everything that happened. The scandal had to be wrapped up. She needed to change clothes to show Marilyn to her future new owner. Their servant was already ready to take them to the stable, but everyone was waiting for Henri to come down. As she came out, she walked primly ahead, embarrassed that this gentleman had seen them in such an unsightly state. She didn't want to show her domestic troubles to a stranger. She was grateful that he walked behind her and remained silent, not raising the situation with a word or hint. However, this did not last long. He still asked if Marilyn was by chance another gift from her late mother. Lost in her thoughts, Henri did not immediately understand the question and asked again. He calmly replied that, in addition to her lace gloves, maybe Marilyn was also something special. Henri stated that she had told him this before through his butler, when she informed him that Marilyn was a member of the family. She stated that this was a horse that she loved dearly. Henri thought that this man was difficult to understand. He asked such personal things so easily. He seemed like a gentleman when in fact he was just a rude man. However, he walked calmly behind her, when suddenly he blocked her path. When he was right in front of her face, she was speechless, not knowing what to say. Maybe he changed his mind about buying Marilyn after such revelations, or he plans to be rude to her in some other way. He looked at her and thought that it was very strange, but the woman's voice seemed familiar to her. He listened to it, trying to figure out where he might have heard it before. Kirsten's father understood that he had definitely never seen her before. She anxiously asked him what was happening to him. Then, addressing him by the name Father, she asked if he could step aside. Henri said that he continues to stand in her way silently, and it's a little annoying. The man still did not leave, trying to pull the necessary memories out of his memory, but he was unsuccessful. He eventually realized that he was acting strangely and apologized. Henri turned around and walked on, as she needed to finally resolve this issue. However, when she turned around, he looked after her, trying to recreate in his soul at least one memory that could connect them. Nothing came to his mind. The necessary fragments were already hidden. They finally approached the stables, which were located quite far from the house. Christina was also led into the stall, and it was the first time Henri had seen him so close. She realized that he was truly a handsome man compared to other horses. Come to think of it, Marilyn really did go all in when she was choosing her boyfriend. Thinking this, Henri bit her smile so as not to say it out loud. However, the man still heard her with the bag, but did not react to it so as not to cause complications. After which he turned to his coachman, asking how Kirsten was doing. After all, that was the main reason he hadn't slept all night. He wanted to make sure it was the right decision. The servant replied that most likely the horse was a little nervous, but became quite calm. Jeffrey was Kirsten's personal guard and trainer, so he was aware of any of his emotional displays. He said that Kirsten seemed to be agitated about the mare, but under Henri's stern gaze he corrected himself and called her by her name, Marilyn. Then he noted that the horse sensed that she was somewhere nearby, and therefore was behaving somewhat excitedly. However, judging by the sound from the other side of the stable, it was clear that Marilyn was also acting rather nervously. Henri decided to hurry and said that Kirsten's father could move on to the business part. The man heard his servant chuckle slightly, but then he flinched and told Henri to continue. Henri had already returned to her normal state and gave a heartfelt speech about how, despite the fact that love is the only thing that matters, the parents of the newlyweds must come to a mutual agreement. After all, there's a honeymoon, plans for children, thoughts about how much each side should contribute to the dowry. It's better to discuss all of this at the beginning. Kirsten's father chuckled and said that of course he had prepared all the necessary papers. With a snap of his finger, he summoned his butler, Albert, who approached with a large suitcase. He gave her a lot of documents to review that they had to sign. However, he immediately snatched them from her hands and said that before that he had one condition. Henri was furious and wondered if he was really going to play by his own rules here. Kirsten's father noted that the horse's pedigree went back to the royal Habsburg family, and that he had been the horse of kings for generations. He noted that at the moment his noble lineage is worthy of mention. Henri decided to clarify what he was trying to say, that his lineage needed to be preserved. Their guest looked at the girl with satisfaction and grinned, after which he bowed demonstratively and noted that, as expected, she possessed the insight worthy of Marilyn's mother. As she accepted the documents from him and called him father, she noted that there was only one thing she desired most. Making a dramatic face, she declared that the main thing was that her Marilyn did not spend her days in tears, pining for the fleeting dream of one single night. The sarcastic conversation seemed to have come to an end, but Henri still had to study the papers. Her interlocutor said that Kirsten was a noble creature who knew part and devotion, so she should not worry. Henri thought to herself, yeah, so he wasn't going to turn away from her after mating, but she said out loud that she was going to run her eyes over the contract now. She had thought the terms of the contract would be vague, but they were even more generous than she had expected, stating that they wanted to lend them a Rochehound carriage. According to the agreement, they also agreed to send a horse in exchange for Marilyn completely free of charge. Henri thanked the guest for this generosity, after which he decided to clarify that since they would be covering the costs of maintaining the staff and then raising the foal, the owner of the fruit of their love would be the father. Henri noted that this was quite fair, after which she made a final decision, summing up the results. However, she said that there was one more request, at which point the butler and the groom looked at each other, wondering when this would end. Henri noted that she would like the foal to leave Marilyn when she is ready. She said she didn't want to separate them too early so her horse could enjoy motherhood. The guest decided that the demand was reasonable and her condition would be fulfilled. Still playing her part, Henri folded her hands in a grateful pose and thanked Father. Then she reached out her hand to Kirsten to pet him. She told him to take care of her Marilyn. She entrusts her to him. Looking at her, Father thought that he was not mistaken in thinking that she was just a stupid wretch who first acts and then thinks. Her conditions were logical. Henri asked the groom to take care of Marilyn, and he promised that they would prepare food for the horses soon. Her affection for this horse was such that it did not seem like she was just pretending. The man decided that he was most likely wrong about her. At that moment, 3 women were waiting in the living room for the guest to return with Henri. The stepmother was saying what one could possibly do for so long in this stinking stable, and Eunice was thinking to herself that nasty things were about to start pouring out. The grown woman continued to be indignant, saying that Henri could just quickly do everything and finally return to the house. She constantly behaves as if she is not interested in men, but clings to them. And the older sister thought that she had done it on purpose, so that they would quarrel. So she managed to make her look bad in front of that gentleman. She burst into tears from the insult, and her mother rushed to her aid, trying to console her. She was hysterical on her knees and kept saying that because of this, Henri she would never get married again. The mother yelled at Eunice how she could continue to chew when her sister was ill. However, she was used to hysterics, but now she was attracted by something happening near the stable. Eunice thought the negotiations were over when Henri left them, but things turned out to be more complicated. She ran as fast as she could towards the house, not paying attention to anyone. She jerked the door open and began calling loudly for the maid Barbara. Her voice could be heard in every corner of the mansion. He was very worried. The maid immediately rushed over. The stepmother came out of the living room and asked what had happened this time and why she was screaming for no reason. Henri told them to hurry and send someone to town for a doctor. The stepmother, perplexed, asked why they needed a doctor and what had happened. Candace became afraid that the noble gentleman she had her eye on had really suffered. The stalls were broken and 2 people were left in need of medical attention. Both grooms were injured, and the doctor tried to do everything to ease their condition. Henri and Kirsten's father looked at what was happening with some annoyance. No one expected such a turn of events, and Marilyn's mother was especially shocked. Everything went downhill when the agreements were reached, and the groom led Kirsten out. The second one at this time released Marilyn, who was already stamping her hoof. However, the groom's strength was not enough to hold back the passionate lovers. As a result, they broke free from their hands, rushing at each other. The servants simply flew away. They received various injuries. As a result, no one understood how to resolve the situation now. Henri then rushed into the house to send for a doctor. Albert turned to Father Christina, who was standing in front of the victims, and said that there was not a single coachman at the moment. He added that there was no way he could leave before tomorrow. The village was very small, so there were few people there who knew how to drive horses. The guest decided that in that case he would stay and monitor Jeffrey's condition, after which he turned to the doctor, a serious man with funny round glasses. He asked if both coachmen were okay, to which he replied that they had done everything possible and were in no danger now. Luckily, both of them only had minor fractures, and their bones will heal within 3 weeks. Henry was glad it was nothing serious and expressed relief. Father Christina said that given the circumstances, he wanted to ask her to keep a little eye on her servants. She replied that she would certainly do everything that was necessary, and he need not worry. She said that it would be better for the doctor to stay overnight too. She would prepare a room for him. In addition, Henri asked the doctor to look after them until they were fully recovered, to which he promised to do everything in his power. After which, she gave instructions that if he needed anything, he should ask the maid. Kirsten's father watched her give orders and went back to his own thoughts. Night had fallen, but not many in the mansion were asleep. Too many events had happened during the day. Kirsten's father headed towards his assigned bedroom, trying to brush off the conversation that had just taken place. The adult woman and her eldest daughter surrounded him with such suffocating care, offering to stay longer, that he even felt disgusted. He tried to banish their images from his head so he could go to sleep peacefully. However, at that moment he heard a conversation from the room in which the injured servants were located. Henry told their coachman not to worry about taxes and wages. She would send a small compensation to his family and asked for forgiveness for how everything turned out. After which she added that it was not such a big mansion, but they could feel at home. Then she wished him a quick recovery, surprising the guest of the house with her care for the servants. The coachman thanked her, thinking that she had put aside her own affairs to simply help an ordinary servant like him. After wishing them good night, she left the room and then went to her own. Kirsten's father watched her go. He was also going to visit the servant, but he wanted her to go much further. He thought to himself that it was strange, although perhaps it was just a little unusual. He had never dealt with girls like this before, he thought. She was unusual. His coachman was about to stand up to greet him, but he asked him not to worry. Unless, of course, he wants to add more problems to him because of his injury, and that was a bit rude. The coachman already felt a burden of guilt for what had happened, but nothing could be changed. Then he turned to the servant of the house asking his name. He said they would need a driver temporarily for the trip to Wentworth, and if he had any urgent business that they would need a replacement for. The servant replied that the gentleman and the young ladies were planning to attend a ball being held by the Duke of Brinston. The guest at the house said that it was quite far from here, in the east of Carlton, and a coachman would still be needed. At this time, Henri was walking down the long corridor, heading to her bedroom. She was terribly tired, she was sleepy, the day had been too long and eventful. However, she saw that the door to Eunice's room was slightly open. It was unclear why she was not sleeping at such a time. She looked inside and heard Candace telling her sister not to dare go to the ball. Even if their mother said so, she had to refuse. Eunice was upset and didn't know how she could refuse. Candace replied that she was not feeling well. After all, if they were seen together, she would die of shame, because Eunice is simply fat. Henri thought that she was again pouring out her negativity on her sister, who had a gentle and kind disposition. Candace said that otherwise she would rip her dress. As she was leaving, she bumped into Henri, who remarked out loud that the real disgrace here was definitely not Eunice. Beside herself with anger, Candace was ready to pounce on Henri. She demanded that she repeat her words, but the younger sister said that she was just talking to herself. Candace noticed that Henri had told the whole neighborhood that she was a disgrace, and she responded by saying that she hadn't done the same thing when she had humiliated Eunice. In the heat of the argument, no one noticed that they were not alone and that they had a witness. However, Candace saw the guest in the house first, after which she decided that she needed to pretend to be the victim. She decided that she would reveal the true nature of this impudent slut. After which, covering her eyes with her hands, she began to cry and said how Henri could treat her like that just because she was not a welcome guest in this house. She added that she doesn't even like the fact that Candace is her sister. Henri didn't understand what kind of nonsense she was talking about and decided to ask about it directly. The guest of the house realized that he was in for an interesting scene and decided not to leave his observation post for now. Henri said that she was constantly bullying Eunice, her real sister, and now she was so upset because someone had accidentally hurt her feelings. Candace replied that Eunice was her real sister, that was different, and that Henri was a fake who had to show respect to her. Henri said that she was not the freeloader here, that she did not have 5 new dresses every month, after which she asked him to do her a favor and leave her. Even her patience had its limits, but Candace asked how she dared to snap back and threatened that she would tell her father everything when he returned. After which she turned around and puffed her way to her bedroom, and Henri thought, how old is she for such behavior? Then she turned around, wishing Eunice good night, but Eunice said it was damn cool. But then she saw that they had a silent observer. However, he didn't say anything, although he realized that she had noticed him. To himself, he thought that it was getting more and more interesting. This girl had enough courage for a company of soldiers. He decided that the upcoming ball might not be as boring as usual. So several days passed. As soon as Henri came into this world, she read the newspaper every morning. If you ask why, it was actually quite simple. The story of the Queen's consorts takes place in 19th century England, but it doesn't quite match the real history of that era. There was a difference between the book and what was happening now, so she needed to understand what period she was in. So she spent every morning reading newspapers and drinking coffee. She paid most attention to the news column in order to stay informed about changes, especially since she had been completely absorbed in the story with Marilyn for the last few days. Because of this, she missed a couple of days, and now there are a lot of newspapers accumulated. There was good news. Handel and Jeffrey's recovery was going well. Unexpectedly, the man never left but stayed in their house, thanks to which Candace finally calmed down. However, because they were in the same house, they had to constantly collide, and it was terribly inconvenient. At this point, Henri's attention was drawn to a note that a special exhibition of the Royal Academy of Arts would be taking place soon. She jumped out of bed. She needed to change her clothes and prepare the crew urgently. She forgot that it was so soon. As she put on her slippers, she suddenly remembered that there was a moment that would interfere with her plan. After all, she now had neither a horse nor a coachman, and she could not get to the exhibition on her own. Little time had passed. The restoration of the servants was going well, but the stated 3 weeks had not yet passed. She thought maybe she should just borrow a carriage, but then she wouldn't have time to see the exhibition, and she didn't have the money for a long stay in the capital. However, she simply had to see every film this year too, as she did year after year. Everything was resolved much more simply at the meeting. Father Christina said that he had fulfilled his promise. He successfully rented a carriage so that the family could go about their business. At the same time, it was luxurious, with an expensive exterior and an elegant and cozy interior. It's not like Henri cared much about it, but convenience is still a good thing. But there was one person who was delighted with her appearance, and that was Candace. She appreciated both the dazzling white color and the rose gold frames, noting that this is the latest fashion trend. Henri thought to herself how much this could cost. It was probably not a small amount. At the same time, Albert said that if they don't like something, just let them know and they will replace everything. Henry noted that this was more than enough, and thanks to them, Handel and Jeffrey could recover calmly, after which she turned to their new guest and thanked him for his help, calling him father. To herself, she thought that she would be able to visit the exhibition that she wanted to see. However, the guest of the house did not finish saying something. He added that he planned to rent the carriage for only 10 days. He decided that this period would be more than enough, at least to compensate for the injury to their coachman and the inconvenience caused. Henri laughed to herself and wondered if he was really that stingy. Afterwards, she said that she would probably have to make a rather inconvenient request to the victims and ask them to recover within this period. Albert decided to rectify the situation and said that his master loved to joke, then added that they should not hesitate to use the carriage as much as necessary. The guest said that he was now heading back. He needed to return to his estate. He asked them to take care of Kirsten since they couldn't take him yet. This request amused Henri a little again, and she couldn't resist making a sarcastic remark. She said that they would definitely take care of the carriage too, since everything in their lives was more important than people. The gentleman only grinned, not responding to her remark. This surprised Albert, who went after him. Kirsten's father wanted to say goodbye to the residents of the house. The mother and eldest daughter were upset and said that he could stay with them for a little while longer if he wanted. However, he immediately decided to go home. He needed to resolve several urgent matters. Already on the way in the carriage, he examined them, planning the deadlines for their completion. However, at that moment, Albert approached him and noticed that he was in a good mood today. The gentleman's menacing gaze measured him, and he asked if he had just smiled. The butler, frightened, noted that this was not the case. Then the gentleman asked what it was. Albert said that before he left he had joked with Miss Wentworth. He usually did not bother to talk to women. His owner asked if what he said sounded like a joke. Albert even started to sweat because he knew that the rental period was not specified. However, judging by his master, one could assume that it was better not to assume good intentions in him. On the way, they continued the conversation, closing this topic, after which the gentleman asked Albert if there was a possibility of postponing the ball. He said that at this rate, he would completely ruin his relationship with Madame, since he had already written her a letter about his unwillingness to marry. This caused quite a loud scandal. Albert could not forget it. The gentleman's mother was furious, but he was relentless. But after such a letter, Albert quite sensibly thought that if he also cancelled the ball, she would be furious. The owner looked at him seriously and asked who his master was, if this was his mother. The butler replied that of course not, but she had made a huge contribution to organizing the ball, after which he asked if perhaps his master had reasons to avoid marriage, to which he received a negative answer. He said that he was simply sick of women since childhood. When asked when it started, if anything happened that caused his dislike, he replied that since he was 4, there had been no event that caused it. Albert asked if this was a joke again, to which he received the answer that it was absolutely not. However, the butler thought that some mischievous girl had apparently given his master a dressing down, but he was very much mistaken. But nevertheless, he reminded that as a person who must continue the family line, he must forget the drama of an unsuccessful childhood romance. The gentleman remembered exactly that it was the 7th of July when he was 4 years old, but in any case, no one would believe him, so he simply does not talk about it. So when someone tells him to just get married and his mother asks him to do it for her sake, because he is already 24, he remains indifferent. While drinking tea, she remarked that when he lived life, he would understand that feelings are not the most important thing. It is not necessary to marry for love, but that is exactly why Kirsten's father did not want to marry. But he understood that he could not put it off any longer. He needed to find a suitable match, and it didn't matter who she was, as long as she matched his interests. The next day, somewhere in the capital, there was an art exhibition. The best works of artists have been collected here, which will delight the eye for many centuries to come. A large number of people gathered. Everyone wanted to be present at this event. At that moment, another carriage drove up, which was quite beautifully decorated. A girl with pink hair and a pink dress came out of it, and she immediately attracted attention. As she walked past the men, everyone looked after her, noting that she was a stunning beauty. However, she did not pay attention to them. Her interest was completely elsewhere. Henry was glad that she was able to visit the art exhibition again, and she wanted to enjoy every moment. She adored these beautiful, precious masterpieces that made her heart skip a beat. After studying the exhibition program, she noticed that there were some things she had to visit first. Behind her, she heard a discussion that such a charming girl came here alone, without an escort, which meant she had absolutely no shame. She slammed the brochure shut, thinking that lack of tact was a more serious vice. However, the men saw lightning flashing from her eyes and hurried away. She thought to herself that it didn't matter who she was walking around with. In any case, there was no one in the capital who could judge her. And the only good thing in this world is the opportunity to see the masterpieces of the great masters of this era in person. She had loved visiting art galleries in her previous life, but here it was an incomparable pleasure. Henri could spend hours looking at the works, wanting to remember every detail. But at the same time, she hoped that she would be able to find a truly famous job. She was right. Just one step away, she saw a sight that made her heart stop. Henri looked at her so intently, but suddenly she heard a familiar voice behind her. He asked if it was Perseus and Andromeda. Henri turned around and screamed. Behind her, she saw Kirsten's father, whom she continued to call that to herself. She called him that out loud, but her cry of father seemed out of place to him in such a place. He said that he is not her father, so it feels a little weird to address him like that. She asked why he didn't tell her his name then, it would be easier. After which, she said that she was surprised that she met him here. Does he like paintings? He replied that his mother loved them more, and when asked whether he came with her, he answered negatively. The former guest said his goal was to buy the painting, but it was not a personal desire. This assignment was given to him by his mother, but he knew that she would be unhappy if he bought just a random painting, so he chose it. But at the same time, he glanced sideways at the delight with which he examined Henri's painting. Her eyes greedily absorbed every little detail, so he reasonably assumed that she liked this painting very much. She replied that she simply knew her. The thing is that she remembered her from exams in a past life. It shows the story of a hero who saved a princess who was given as a sacrifice. Her interlocutor noted that artists are especially fond of this princess. Henry noted that anyone would love a beautiful trophy. A kind and beautiful girl was sacrificed because her mother had offended the gods. By royal decree, she was given in marriage to the hero who saved her and bore him 6 children. Her whole life was told in the passive voice she was the ideal woman for that era. And even so, Andromeda was very lucky, or so Henry thought, which surprised her interlocutor quite a bit. He decided to clarify what it was, and she said that her fate was not the most favorable. At least someone saved her, thinking to herself that she had no one to rely on. In this picture, she seemed to see her reflection from a past life that she could not forget. She had no one left in Korea, so she had no one to worry about, and her interlocutor noticed her sadness. At this point, they were interrupted by a man who said that if they were finished watching, could they please step aside. They continued walking through the gallery, each lost in their own thoughts. Henri thought that she didn't even notice how she opened up at the end. It was even awkward. He decided to change the subject and said that his mother had asked him to buy some paintings for her, so he decided to ask Henri for help in choosing. She was so excited that she almost started screaming when he said that once she finished watching, she could choose the right ones. He noted that she didn't look like someone who had been here a couple of times, so she definitely had a better understanding of art than he did. After adding that it was probably fun to buy paintings with other people's money, Henri enthusiastically agreed, after which she immediately headed towards the exhibition to choose the best. Kirsten's father was even amused by her speed, but he was glad for her help, and he thought to himself that her eyes were like 2 pink sapphires. It was already getting dark when they left the exhibition, but Henri was completely pleased with herself. She was so excited that she chose 5 paintings at once. She just could never afford to buy art, so she went to exhibitions. Kirsten's father thanked her for her help, and Henri asked him not to give away these paintings or sell them in the near future. She said that they were all from the same unknown artist and would become very famous. He noted that he would definitely pass it on to his mother, although he had doubts about the purchase. She suddenly felt surrounded by people, and he was the only one who mattered, after which the thought even flashed through her mind that he was much more handsome than the main character, whom, of course, she had not forgotten. However, she decided to speak out and asked if they really had to put the paintings inside the carriage. She was not very comfortable sitting next to him, to which he objected that one lady had remarked that these paintings would become very valuable. He then added that he gets motion sickness when he sits with his back to the movement. Henri felt like he was flirting with her, but the realization of how handsome he was made the situation even more uncomfortable. The memories of the old Henri remained in her, and she remembered that she was the same girl to whom every guy in Courtney confessed his love at least once. She simply didn't have time to waste her nerves on this, but at that moment Kirsten's father noticed that she didn't have a very good relationship with her sisters. She laughed and said that they were worried about when their little sister would get married. He replied that her older sister had a different opinion on this matter, in his opinion. Henri replied that her sister might say different things, but in reality she simply adored her. He noted that in that case, the thought of being separated from her sisters would be very sad for her. She answered in the affirmative. Then he said that this was a problem, since he was interested in the prospects of her marriage. Henri continued to be sarcastic, so she asked him out of place what he meant. Her laughter seemed to have been taken away by hand, but she tried not to show it until she got the main question. Turning to her, Kirsten's father asked if he could not become her Perseus, after which he said that maybe he just isn't right for her. She can say it out loud. Henri realized that this was all serious, but she didn't know what to answer. She looked at him, dumbfounded. Did he really just propose to her, this arrogant man? He chuckled and asked if there was anyone else there, to which she replied no. However, she couldn't resist asking why he wanted her to marry him. After all, he couldn't fall in love with her in such a short time. Why did he choose her? To which he only smirked. He recalled how she had said that Andromeda must be lucky. At first it seemed like a casual remark, more like a thought she had been holding in for a long time. Then she noticed that although she was jealous, their family was really just a stepmother and sisters, who were worse than strangers, and a father who rarely showed up at home. To inherit, Henri needed a husband, but she had little influence in the marriage market. Most likely because no one expects a large dowry from her. In other words, she has no choice but to surrender. So he thought that this was too tempting an offer for her to refuse. He proposes to her because she is jealous of Andromeda. She suddenly felt cold and asked what this had to do with him. He replied that he too was looking for his Andromeda. Henri tried to clarify further, after which she said that he really wanted someone who was like her. The man said he was looking for someone who needed saving, not love. Henri called him father again, noticing that even their horse's marriage contract did not have his name on it. He noted that if this was a problem for her, they could discuss it later. However, Henri noticed that high-ranking nobles had a special atmosphere around them that they could not hide no matter how hard they tried. After which she noted that he does not give his name. This must mean that he is very famous and influential. He replied that he would tell his name to the man he would marry, and Henri asked if he needed an heir. He answered negatively, to which Henri suggested that his position was different from that of his father and family. He did not answer, after which she said that she might be good at defending her interests, but she was not a noblewoman by nature. After this, she added that she had no desire to take responsibility, to which he replied that she should also understand another point. In fact, he was the best way to escape, and he was ready to offer her everything she wanted. It doesn't matter if she refuses to fulfill her noble duties, but he wants her. It sounded almost as rude when he said her mare wanted his stallion. It was indeed cheeky, but she still decided to pretend to think about his proposal. Then, looking into his eyes, she laughed loudly and said that she refused. The evening that followed turned out to be not the most pleasant in her life, as usual. As always, a scandal erupted. Her older sister got on her nerves for meeting with Kirsten's father. Henri stood by the window and remembered how it was. She screamed that she was a little wretch who managed to run away to him on a date, taking her fiancé away from her. Henri replied that she should just leave her alone. She didn't have to explain anything to her. The enraged sister slammed the door and went away, but she managed to spoil the mood. Now Henri was sitting in front of the closed canvas that father had given her before leaving. She alone didn't know what else to call this man, but she was interested in what he had given her. When he presented it, he said he wanted her to receive this painting for her help in choosing the works of art. She was stunned because she did not expect such a gift, especially since she did not yet know what was in it. As he was leaving, he suggested that they meet again, being absolutely sure that this would happen in the near future. However, she did not plan to go anywhere else. Her main goal was this painting gallery. When she slightly tore the cloth that covered the image, she saw a naked Andromeda. He was right. Absolutely in everything, he saw right through her. This man understood perfectly well that she wanted to escape from this house. He knew that she had no choice. However, no matter whether a noblewoman or a duchess, a woman must give birth to children if she wants a comfortable life. Andromeda was able to give birth to 6 children because Perseus was a good husband. But there is no guarantee that he is as good as Perseus, Henri thought to herself. Moreover, she understood perfectly well that she did not want to be Andromeda, the one who needed to be saved. She touched the canvas and thought, feeling incredibly lonely. It was as if someone's hand touched her head from behind, and she felt the touch of unconditional love. It was as if her mother was standing behind her, trying to comfort her and help her cope with her troubles. She stroked her baby's head, and on the table lay an upside-down frame with her photograph, which was painful for Henri to look at. However, here she stood up, deciding that she no longer wanted to give in to dark thoughts. It was time to live her own life. They were all in the past now, and she wanted to be happy, especially since she had a real reason to be happy. After all, she had her first painting of her own, and it was an amazing work of art. While Henri was thinking about where to hang the painting, the house was in complete disarray. There were screams all around, and the maids tried unsuccessfully to force Eunice into a corset. Her mother came to the rescue. Slender Candace sat to the side and did not participate, although she was called. She said it was useless. Even if Eunice squeezed into it after such a heavy breakfast, she would only feel sick. The mother tried to calm her down, seeing how upset her daughter was when Candace said it would be like putting pearls on a pig's neck, after which she said that she would be very ashamed if she was seen with her fat sister. She suggested to her mother that they go together. Henri heard this conversation standing behind the door. However, she was hurried by the maid, who said that breakfast was waiting for her, not giving her time to overhear the conversation further. Henri was eating quietly when the maid asked if she could ask her a question. She wondered if she really wouldn't go, because this was the Duke of Bristol's ball. It was very important. Henri knew that this ball was the place where Edwin and Hergé first met. However, as a secondary character, she won't see any of this anyway, so she has nothing to do there, so she won't go. The maid suggested that she have a good rest then, promising to bring newspapers and dessert. Then Henri heard the sound of wheels driving away, as at that moment Eunice entered the room. She asked if Candace had made her stay home and that was why she hadn't gone. Eunice just looked away, after which Henri immediately made a decision and said that she had changed her mind. They would go there together, after which she gave Eunice a good shake and said it was just a stupid ball so she should go with her, after which she called all the maids to tidy up her sister. In vain did she say that nothing would come of it, and anyway, someone like her would not get a single dance at this ball. Henri noted that she was not okay at all because she cried until her eyes were swollen. She needed to fix that. She then added that Eunice is not at all unattractive because she has such clear skin, and her hair is a warm, beautiful shade, like a golden wheat field in autumn. The maid wanted to help and said that her cheeks were very soft and she didn't need to put on any extra makeup. Henri agreed completely, after which she sent Barbara to her room and told her to bring that dress. The maid was amazed, but the mistress's voice was unwavering, and she said that there were still some things in Eunice that needed to be changed. A few hours later, she was already dressed up, her hair was pulled back into a beautiful hairstyle, and the maids were admiring her. Henri looked at her and felt satisfaction as she had managed to achieve her goal. It was her mother's wedding dress, and Henri had hidden it so that Candace wouldn't have a chance to try it on. However, Eunice still had doubts and asked if it was really possible to wear this. Henri laughed and said that this dress was as if made for her. It finally found its rightful owner. It really suited Eunice perfectly. Anyone who saw her in it would think she was beautiful. The sister quietly thanked Henri. However, after this it was necessary to put the youngest daughter in order, despite the fact that she did not want this at all. They arrived at the Duke's palace when it was already dark. However, it was blindingly light, and Eunice, standing behind Henri, was at a loss. Henri herself was also impressed. She tried to absorb everything that surrounded her, because it was so important. She found herself in Edwin's house, the one she had read about, where her favorite hero lived. She wondered if he had already met Queen Hergé, or if it was still to come. Eunice noted that all the people were looking at them, and Henri ordered her to control herself despite her delight. However, she noticed that men did indeed turn around to look at the two of them. Then she turned around and said that since they had come here, they needed to dance. At that moment, Henri noticed a man standing alone who would have been a perfect match for Eunice. He calmly sipped his drink, looking either confused or sad. Henri decided to take matters into her own hands. Approaching him, she asked for forgiveness before speaking. However, he was taken by surprise and spilled the drink on Eunice, which left him extremely embarrassed, trying to make amends for his guilt. Henri decided to take a good look at him, after which she finally made her decision. Tall, well-built, handsome, a little awkward but innocent-looking, he was approved. After which she feigned indignation and said that he had just seriously insulted her sister. Then she said that it seemed like music was starting to play in the hall. The hint was quickly understood. The man asked if he could ask Eunice to dance as an apology. She was completely at a loss but managed to squeeze out words of agreement. Henri decided that the mission was accomplished. Now she could go and eat, as she had intended to do. Sitting at the table, she thought that rich people really didn't spare money on food at such parties. However, sitting with her mouth full, she suddenly heard a voice behind her that said, "There you are." Turning around, she saw Father Kirsten, who said he had been looking for her. She thought it was impossible. He couldn't have known that she would be at this ball. Even she herself didn't know. However, she suddenly remembered that the names of newly arrived guests are announced when they enter the hall. Henri realized that this was what he had meant when he had told her before the meeting that she should not have come. He turned to her and said that she had hardly come this way for food. Since fate had brought them together again, he would like to ask her for something. After which, in a very gentlemanly manner, he leaned over and asked if she was ready to give him this dance. Looking at him, she thought that for some reason he was not at all embarrassed, although not much time had passed since she rejected him. Usually men behave rather strangely. But since he doesn't care, then why should she be embarrassed, especially since she can be polite in return for the gift? She placed her hand in his palm and said that she was ready to give him a dance, but only one. They walked to the center of the hall and after the standard bows began to dance. Her interlocutor asked if she had arrived in a carriage with Kirsten. You answered that yes, Kirsten and Marilyn brought her here. Then he asked why she was so late, since the ball had already started a long time ago. With these words, he spun her around so abruptly that it even seemed inappropriate to her. She thought that she couldn't let him control the conversation. She needed to control herself. Henry asked him if he hadn't looked for other brides at the ball, to which she replied that the first girl he found was so amazing. Putting his arm around her waist more than necessary, he declared that no one else looked worthy in his eyes. Even though these were the obligatory dance movements, Henri felt that something else was going on. After which, trying to maintain control over the dialogue, she said that maybe he should lower his standards. He chuckled and then asked why he would do that. Turning around, she saw that those annoying members of her family were right in front of them. She wondered what was going on with their faces, then turned around, realizing that something strange was happening. Finally, for the first time, she noticed that no one was dancing anymore. For some reason, everyone was staring at them. Even Eunice and her boyfriend stood to the side, watching the couple move. But her partner wouldn't let go, so she had no choice but to continue dancing, no matter what. Looking at them, Eunice thought they looked amazing, like a prince and princess straight out of a fairy tale. And although her dress was less bright than Eunice's, she still looks very elegant. She also thought to herself that she was not only beautiful, but also very kind and smart to take care of someone like Eunice herself. As if sensing her heavy thoughts, the golden-haired gentleman turned to her, looking at her with sadness. Everyone continued to look at the dancing couple, who were not particularly embarrassed by the presence of other people. However, for Henri, it still seemed strange. Why was everyone looking like that? Even Eunice wasn't dancing. What could that mean? Her partner continued to speak. He said that he acknowledged his failure, which came from his poor judgment. Henri did not understand what he was talking about, to which he replied that he was wrong. He shouldn't have made his proposal like that without asking what she really wanted. Henri couldn't focus enough on the room while also keeping up with the conversation, so she had to choose. Moreover, the conversation finally got on the right track for her, because he was offering her a choice. He asked her directly why she didn't tell him the conditions she wanted for her marriage. Then he could truly be the one to save Andromeda. According to the laws of dance, at this moment they separated as another part began. Now everyone had to line up, so it was a bit awkward to talk. Her partner extended his hand to her, inviting her to dance again, and she froze in indecision. She initially said it would only be one dance, but the conversation became more and more interesting. Henri looked down, hesitant, and then said that it was up to her to decide, after which she stood in line with the other women. At the same time, she asked whether any conditions that she was prepared to voice would suit him. He replied categorically that she could ask for whatever she wanted. When she placed her palm in his hand, she already knew what she was going to ask for. She said that she wanted him to make her a man. At first, he didn't even understand her words. It was as if he just heard them. Black lightning seemed to flash in his head, and he asked her again what it meant. She replied that, to be precise, she needed the status of a man, to which he asked why she needed it if she was going to be his wife. She laughed and asked if he really planned to be with her all his life. Her interlocutor did not know what to answer. Apparently, he had some other plans. However, he still asked if Miss Henry was already thinking about divorcing him, even before she was engaged. She replied that it would be better for both of them to avoid a lifetime contract, because in the future, they might meet someone they would truly love. Besides, there were so many things she wanted to do in this life that she didn't want to limit herself, so it would be madness for her to agree to a permanent contract. He decided to clarify again, but at that moment she did not understand why everyone was looking at her like that again. He clarified once again that she wanted him to marry her to get her out of her house and then help her escape through divorce, even to the point of giving her a false male identity. He rightly noted that the contract was turning out to be incredibly one-sided. Henri noticed that it was he who was so desperate for this marriage. Her life would change completely because of him. Her partner realized that she was absolutely right, but she added something else. In exchange for this, even if he has an affair, she won't care. The dance ended. The couples separated again. The men lined up opposite the women. However, at this point, her interlocutor said that he preferred to remain faithful in their marriage. Henri just laughed and said that everything would be as he wished. For her part, like Perseus's wife, she will be devoted to him. Apparently, he was satisfied with this situation because after a short thought, he extended his hand to her. Then he said he would be honest with his Andromeda, and he immediately offered to come in to seal their agreement. They found themselves in a long corridor, and Henri still didn't understand where they were going. Walking slightly ahead of her, Perseus declared that he agreed to her terms. That is, he made a promise to her, started to speak, but stopped a little. Turning around, he added, "She will become the Duchess of Brinston," a statement that left her in complete shock. She realized that something had gone wrong, because in the novel, everything was completely different. However, she decided to ask and said whether he really was the Duke of Brinston himself, Edwin Ascar, the one because of whom she came to this world trying to rewrite its history. How could this even happen, since they weren't supposed to cross paths with him? What happened at his first meeting with Hergé? Why is he here? Because everything should have been completely different. However, he replied, "Is it strange that the owner of Brinston is in Brinston?" He noted that her reaction was even more surprising. He thought she was simply pretending not to know who he was. However, Henri was still recovering from the shock of why he chose her to marry. Besides, in her mind, he was colder, more reserved, and detached. Now she saw some arrogant, annoying, handsome idiot. She was brought to her senses by his words that her changing facial expression was very funny, after which he declared that there was no turning back. She had already given her consent. At that moment, they entered one of the living rooms where several women were sitting. Turning to the eldest of them, Edwin called her, calling her mother. He then said that this was Miss Henry Wentworth of the Viscount Wentworth family, and then introduced her to his mother, the former Duchess of Brinston. The former meant that there would be a new one, so his mother asked him if this was true and couldn't finish the sentence. Her son replied that he was going to marry Miss Henri and they would have a new duchess. At that moment, a ringing silence broke out in the living room. No one dared to say a word. However, it was interrupted by the sound of a cup breaking when it was dropped from his mother's hands. She screamed at him because everything was planned differently. The Duchess planned this ball to find him a bride. Everything went wrong. He knew that desperate look she often gave him when she said what the people who came here because of him would think. He said that he was simply following his mother's instructions and was going to get married. What was the problem? The rest of those present suddenly heard that there was talk of marriage, and many said that it was clear that he did not yet have a bride. The women discussed how much they had invested in preparing their daughters, who would have thought that the Duke had a secret love. The Duchess thought that the women who came today were thrown to the mercy of God. They simply didn't have a single chance, but she decided to get out of the situation beautifully. She thanked everyone for attending their banquet today, and then said that they had to leave, hoping for their understanding. Then she decided to leave to talk with her future daughter-in-law and son. With a forced smile, she wished everyone a good evening, then looked towards her son. He immediately put his arm around his future wife's shoulder and invited her to go with him. She was confused, but Edwin said that no one would eat her. Nevertheless, she looked confused, but there was no turning back. She had chosen it herself. The living room was quite quiet, but it was furnished with great taste. It is clear that Edwin's mother, who was a duchess, was in charge of this. It was a monumental woman, Elizabeth Ascar, widow of the Duke of Brinston. She showed aristocratic politeness and said that there had been a very tense situation earlier, so she had not been able to greet her daughter-in-law properly. Afterwards, she declared that she was glad to meet Lady Wentworth, despite the fact that Henri replied that it was an honor for her. Edwin's mother liked these words and smiled contentedly. After that, she said that their family is constantly short of people, so even at her age she has to do a lot of things, so she is forced to be in Carlton. That's why she knew very little about Henry's family. She replied that her family lived in the southwest. It's a remote area, so everything is quite understandable. Mom replied that she had apparently traveled a long way to get to this ball. The situation was quite complicated. The mother looked at her son and thought, why is this fool not saying anything? After all, he brought home a bride. He should at least say something. She was already seething with anger. It was visible in her eyes. Henri was perplexed. However, Edwin remained silent, apparently deciding that the women should get to know each other on their own. In Henri's mind at that moment, it was that this man was indeed Edwin, and it was no surprise that he revealed his name, since his family was incredibly rich and powerful. Looking at him, she realized that he was different from what she had imagined, but he was truly incredibly handsome. His face was perfect. That enchanting, thoughtful look seemed to be carried away somewhere. She sat lost in her thoughts, not taking part in the conversation in any way, but then a sharp thought struck her. She did not give her peace because she could change her entire destiny as well as her loved ones. After all, it turned out that she stole Hergé's husband, the queen's own lover. It would be fine if she were adequate, but the queen was a murderer who eliminated everyone she didn't like. At this point, the Duchess spoke again and said that she was curious how the two met. Let her add that she was also interested in why Lady Henri decided to marry him. The question was rather improper, so she decided to correct herself and said that she considered Edwin to be truly handsome and a gentleman, to which her son pulled her away. He said that they should greet Lady Andrew's family before it was too late. Mother sighed that he was not at all tactful. Henri only smiled. She looked at the Duke, but he did not reveal the secret of their acquaintance, which was generally quite understandable. His mother again complained that he was too indelicate, but Henri already knew what to say. She hugged the Duke and said that he was very kind to her, so she should not worry. She thought to herself that even though she had provoked him, he was very generous. And he didn't even cause any harm to their family, although she was already expecting something completely different from him. Her last words puzzled his mother a little, but she immediately pulled herself together. She said it was a great relief that Henri treated her son like that. However, it was really necessary to go, because the family that had come to the ball could leave soon. So the three of them headed for the ballroom, the Duke first, followed by his mother, and then Henri. At that moment, the older sister was crying, not thinking about the impression she was making on others. She told her mother that Henri should not marry before her, since she was the eldest. At this point, there was gossip behind Henri's stepmother's back, but she thought that the fact that this young man turned out to be a duke was already a big surprise, but he announced his engagement right in front of everyone. The eldest daughter called her again nervously, to which her mother pulled her up and asked her to stop whining. It was terrible. She thought to herself that in any case, it didn't matter which daughter became the Duchess. After all, this naughty little girl is still her daughter, and it has finally paid off. Who would have thought that the esteemed Duke of Brinston would lay eyes on her, but out loud she said something completely different. She noted that the Duke could fall in love with her because she was very beautiful and kind. Then she told the Duchess that until today she could not have imagined that they were so close, although there were preconditions for this. Then the Duchess looked at her son and said that he had been too reckless. However, he did not answer, keeping silent as usual, waiting for the matter to resolve itself. The Duchess apologized on Edwin's behalf, to which the stepmother replied that everything was fine. It was good that the Duke was interested in her daughter. At the same time, the eldest daughter standing next to her was outraged that she was constantly repeating this word. Although she had never used it before, Henri was just an evil little girl. The Duchess told the Ventvortev family to stay and have dinner together the next day. She then added that they had brought Lady Eunice Wentworth, the last member of their family. This is where mother and daughter were truly stunned, since Eunice should not have been at this ball at all. Even Henri's stepmother cried out, not recognizing the girl who had arrived as her daughter. And she stood there, confused, not knowing what to say, seeing the strange reaction of her older sister and mother. At that moment, Henri realized that she needed to save the situation, so she immediately rushed to Eunice. Candace asked if they were sure they had brought the right girl. Even the mother couldn't recognize her as her daughter. Henri rushed past Edwin to cheer up her sister, to whom she was not exactly attached, but she appreciated her. She immediately declared that everything was fine. It really was Eunice. She had been riding with her in the same carriage today. Let her tell the Duchess that Sister Eunice is the dearest member of the family to her. This is where the jaws of both the stepmother and the older sister dropped, as they had never noticed that they were getting along. The Duchess then decided to ask again whether this was really so, and Edwin looked on, realizing that Henri had some kind of game in mind. However, she continued to hug her and said that she was her best friend and part of the family. She was stunned by her behavior and could not utter a word. However, Henri whispered in her ear to make her be more confident and stand up straight. The Duchess said it was a pleasure to meet her, and then asked if she had had a good time that day, to which Eunice replied in the affirmative. After which she noted that this was all thanks to the ball organized by the Duchess, for which she sincerely thanked her. At this moment, it was interesting to look at the stunned faces of both the stepmother and the sister, who did not expect such an answer from Eunice. Candace looked simply amazed, because she had the most expensive dress. However, Eunice was wearing a more luxurious and much more expensive dress, which the Duchess immediately noticed. She said that it was made in the old style, but was adjusted to modern fashion, and then asked if she had really made it with her own hands. Eunice replied that it was all Henri, who said that she had only made a few additions to show how nice her sister was. The Duchess remarked that the dress suited Eunice very well, which made her even more embarrassed. Eunice felt that Henri's hand that held hers was so warm, so familiar. After this, Henri remembered that her little sister had danced with that gentleman, after which she asked how it all ended. Eunice blushed, almost exploded, and then said that he would send her a letter. Henri was genuinely happy for her little sister, and the Duchess shared her joy, but the others were perplexed. Her mother immediately came up with the idea and said that it was wonderful, after which she called her darling, which she had never done before. But nevertheless she inquired who this gentleman was, to which Eunice had not yet answered. The Duchess remarked that they seemed to have a lot of topics to talk about tomorrow. However, one shadow stood and felt superfluous in this celebration of life, but could not do anything about it. The next day was a beautiful morning, but Henri had a lot to do. She stood in front of Edwin's office from early morning, as they had a lot of things to do. She was afraid to touch the handle, as she had imagined this place many times while reading the book. After all, this was Edwin's office, according to the book, where he developed all his plans, immersed in his thoughts. This was the most secret place, accessible only to the head of the house. She never thought she would be able to see him with her own eyes, but it was true. Behind her, she heard a voice saying that she had come too early. She greeted him, wished him good morning, calling him Your Highness. Looking at her, he thought that he was not imagining things, since yesterday she had been avoiding eye contact with him. He started the conversation that there was no way back, so they needed to discuss the main nuances before marriage. Henri had not yet come to her senses. Walking along the red carpet, she was quite embarrassed. However, Edwin reminded them that with the sunrise, rumors had spread throughout the kingdom, so they could not back down. Henri thought that this was probably true, but his gaze was rather dry and businesslike. He said he invited her here to finalize the terms of the contract, after which he offered her a folder so that she could familiarize herself with all the documents. She sat and read, so as not to miss a word. She remembered how cruel the queen could be. Nevertheless, she wondered if she would really marry Edwin, the one she had decided to write about herself. However, when she started reading the contract, she realized that it was simply an arranged marriage, nothing more. Edwin indicated at the very beginning that the terms of the contract must be kept strictly confidential by the partners. However, the second point stated that the contract term was 30 years, which was unexpected, and she said, "Why so much? Because this is a large part of conscious life." He grinned and said, "Okay, then let it be 29 years. She was still looking at him. He had dropped another 10 years. "What kind of discount is this in a store, damn it? That doesn't happen." Then she said that 3 years was more than she would agree to, and he replied that he was then ready to set a probationary period of 3 years. If they survive these 3 years without violating the terms of the contract, it will be extended for life, but either party can terminate it at any time. However, in this case, they need to notify the other 3 months in advance to ensure all procedures are followed, after which Henri read that any physical contact, including kissing, should be discussed in advance and used as needed. At the same time, at least once a month, including the wedding night, Party A must spend the night in the room of Party B. She imagined that they could share a bed together. It was incredible. For her, this was a great shame, for which she was now completely unprepared. Edwin put his hand to his forehead and said that it meant that they would be in the same room. Henri calmed down and said that they could read on. However, there was another strange clause that stated that during the contract, both parties could not be in romantic relationships with strangers. They must not allow any form of intimate relations. Henri said that this point should be made more clear, to which Edwin again put his hand to his head. Henri said that it couldn't be vague. Does that mean she can't talk to men? Edwin understood that this was not the point at all. He had no desire at all to explain what was happening between a man and a woman. Henri continued reading the contract, but there were no more unexpected points. After this, he turned to her and asked permission to ask a question. He reminded her that when they were dancing yesterday, she said that she had many goals and dreams. Could he know about them? She thought about it and remembered her most important one, the one that inspired her. She said it could be called a lifelong dream. He must have noticed at the exhibition that she loved art, especially paintings. Unfortunately, she is not gifted with the talent to create them herself, but she can certainly appreciate them. She would like to support talented artists, open a small gallery, and when she has time, travel the world. Traveling the world in search of great works of art sounded rather romantic and confused Edwin. Squeezing his hands, he thought that she was ready to give up her luxurious life and status as a noblewoman for the sake of paintings. Any other woman would have sold her life for this, but she was ready to give it all up just to get her own pleasure. However, here she said that there was one more condition concerning their divorce. Turning to the window, he said that at present there was no way for them to separate while maintaining their position in society. After which he continued that this meant that the Duchess would have to act in a certain way. His voice was chilling, but he was relentless, leaving her no choice. That is, Henrietta Wentworth would have to die in order to continue living as a man as she wished. Seeing her stunned face, he added that this would only be on paper. Henri said that she was not at all against it. She was happy with this arrangement. Edwin asked her if she was absolutely sure and didn't want to change her mind. The bride replied that she had said so at the very beginning. She needed a new start, but in return she would ask for something. He must fulfill this promise no matter what, no matter how life turns out. He waited for her to speak, to which she stated that he had to promise that her family and she would be safe. He asked if she had noticed any threats lately, or she thinks he will become a threat to her just because she will no longer be of any value to him. On the one hand, this was logical, but Henri knew something about him that did not give her peace. As a servant of the Queen, he was exactly the kind of person who killed everyone in sight. He was a man of honor, but after he became Hergé's shadow, he changed completely. He simply became her ruthless dog, who would tear apart even his former comrades without a second thought. If these two fell in love, Hergé would definitely see her as a nuisance, and she didn't want to die at her hands. She wanted even less to die at the hands of Edwin, who meant a lot to her. He chuckled but agreed to her demands. However, he thought that she didn't know him well enough to express unnecessary thoughts, after which he took the contract into his hands, leafed through it, and pointed to the necessary clause. It stated that Party A must ensure the security of Country B for a certain period after the conclusion of the contract. He suggested that she set a deadline of 5 years so that she would be completely confident in the safety of her family. Edwin added that once her death was announced, all her connections would be severed. This chapter was added specifically to ensure her safety. However, he was willing to add one more condition, posthumous care for the Wentworth family, and asked if that would be enough for her. She thought it was more than enough for everyone to be able to escape abroad if necessary, which she stated to him out loud. Of course, she didn't add anything about running away, but he looked at her condescendingly again, and she exhaled. But to be honest, she didn't expect him to be so attentive to their fictitious marriage. Nevertheless, she thanked him for it, and then asked for forgiveness if she was going too far. He noted that then this point could be left as is, without changing it. Let him add that he didn't expect them to discuss it so soon, but there is one more point. It was just a precaution, but there were some thoughts he couldn't help but express out loud. In fact, he doubted that they would actually get divorced, but this precaution had to be taken into account. I thought to myself, did he really look so calculating and scary? Did he really do something that wasn't trustworthy? At that moment, his assistant knocked on the door and addressed him. Edwin allowed him to enter. He said that Madame demanded his presence and that he could not refuse her under any circumstances. Edwin turned to Henri and told her to look over the contract today. They needed to continue discussing it the next day. She asked if she really wouldn't return home today, since that was in her plans. They froze, apparently not fully understanding what each of them should do at that moment. After which Edwin declared that from now on, this place would be her home. She thought to herself that she hadn't even signed the contract yet. Wasn't marriage a long process? After all, there was supposed to be a wedding ceremony, cohabitation, marriage registration. He replied that this was a matter of confidentiality until the final terms of the marriage were established. She noted that in the end it was necessary to at least meet with the parish priest and get to know the domestic staff. Then she added that she needed to inform her father, and Edwin's face showed how indifferent he was to him. He turned to his assistant and asked him to send an urgent letter to Viscount Wentworth. Then he said that if she had things she wanted to bring from her home here, she could do so, to which he received a negative response. After which she went home with the contract, and Edwin thought about it. He asked if she didn't want to leave this place where she was unhappy, because it was all reasonable. She remembered her life in a family with a stepmother and 2 sisters, realizing that she did not want to struggle day after day. He said that it was in her best interests to get used to the new home as quickly as possible, then it would be much easier for her. And after that, together with his assistant, he went to his mother, and she remained lost in thought. His servant at this time thought that he, as always, was doing whatever he pleased, and no one could contradict him. The next day, her family was planning to return to their home after lunch. The stepmother, as always, was talking nonsense, declaring that the Duke's house knew how to communicate with guests in different ways. Then she said that Henri had hit the jackpot with this marriage, and it was all thanks to her cute face, and she thought what nonsense she was talking about. After which she finally said out loud that she knew this and would never have thought that she would get married before Candace. She looked at her with a confused face, no longer feeling her mother's support. After which she turned around abruptly and headed towards the carriage, not wanting to listen to this anymore. Henri ran after her and said that she needed to learn to stop in time because the Duchess had given her a new dress, to which she said that she needed the Duke's unmarried relatives. The mother shouted that she needed to think about her sister, that she could at least try. Eunice said goodbye to Henry warmly. She said that she thought that they would get married at about the same time, but events turned out differently. After which, looking sincerely into her eyes, she said that she was grateful for yesterday. Henri just smiled and said that it was not worth thanking. She had always treated her middle sister warmly. After which she asked her to keep her informed about her relationship with that gentleman, to which Eunice gave her a promise. It was only thanks to her that she happily waved her hand at the carriage, expecting a quick meeting. She had a strange feeling. Edwin's assistant at that moment turned to her and said that he wanted to introduce someone to her. It was a middle-aged woman who said she was glad to meet her. Her name was Lauren Chester. She was the housekeeper. Henri immediately remembered, because she was mentioned in the book, and she remembered everything quite vividly. After which she said that it was an honor for her to meet her. She would rely on her help, to which she replied that she would be glad to be useful to the new Duchess. Henri was flying in her thoughts and thinking that she had managed to meet the most faithful assistant of the former Duke from the book in real life. For her, it was like meeting a celebrity, and her mind was spinning. The Duke's assistant wanted to take his leave, leaving them to discuss matters. However, here Henri's memories flashed. Something didn't add up. Was the butler from the original story really named Albert? It seems like he was a completely different person. Henri remembered that the butler was not an important character, but she clearly remembered that it was a different person. He had previously served the previous Duke. His name was Ben. He did not approve of Edwin's indifference to the family and constantly reported his words to the former Duchess. Because of the misunderstanding of whom he should serve, he was thrown out of the mansion. Confused, Albert turned to his mistress, asking if everything was all right. However, Henri remembered that Ben was kicked out much later, at which time Albert asked what was bothering her. After all, from the moment she first saw him, he was constantly next to Edwin, which means the original story has changed. She decided to ask a question, asking Albert's permission, and asked how long he had been serving the Duke. He replied that ever since he had held his title with us, he had been the chief lackey. The story didn't add up, but there was logic to it. She asked him if he had been working here for quite a long time, which made him smile contentedly. Then Henri asked a question that confused both servants. She asked what happened to the butler who was before him. He retired. The housekeeper and the butler exchanged glances. There was something fishy about this. He started to say that he was not really very well liked, but at that moment the housekeeper stepped on his foot, after which he said that he had resigned. Henri asked if she could find out his name, to which Albert replied that his name was Ben Robert. She realized that she was right. She remembered that the butler was completely different. Albert's words only confirmed this, but it was unclear why he was replaced earlier, since this was not the case in the original story. That is, the book has changed. Now it is unknown what to expect, since everything will not go according to plan. At that moment, yes, the housekeeper decided to give Henri a tour of the building. She informed her that the Brinston estate consisted of 3 buildings, the first being the banqueting hall in which they had danced yesterday. Madame lives in Alice's estate, which was the farthest from here, and they stood right in front of the Mayfair building. It was the place where the gentleman lived. The maid added that this would of course be the place where Henri would live, after which she suggested taking a walk and getting acquainted with the layout of the rooms. Then she led her into the room where the Dukes of Brinston had lived for generations. They couldn't help but arouse admiration. It was truly an amazingly furnished place. Henri said it looked as if love itself had taken shape and become this room. She then added that this was the most elegant and charming place in the entire estate. The housekeeper said that the gentleman had previously informed her that Henri would be using this room today. She was in shock. Could she really be in such a beautiful room? The housekeeper said that since they were soon to be married, there was nothing strange in this, but Henri noted her excessive politeness, which worried her. But she realized that this room had been waiting for its owner for a long time, and now a village girl, who appeared out of nowhere, had occupied this residence. It was only natural that the servant might be dissatisfied, but the housekeeper said that she had prepared everything for the new Duchess. Therefore, Henri can use this room for his own pleasure. She thought to herself that in 3 years she would leave anyway, but she thanked the housekeeper for her helpfulness. She replied that this was her job as a servant, so there was no need to thank her. However, once she got out the door, she leaned against it, lost in her thoughts. She thought that Henri would lose his head when he saw the room, but unlike her family, who act very self-confident, she does not forget to treat the services with respect. If this is a pretense, then she is very cunning, but if this is her character, then so much the better for them. At this time, Henri pushed aside one of the drawers of the chest of drawers. There was a beautiful ruby necklace that had a fashionable feel to it. She held it in her hands, but she didn't feel the necessary satisfaction, as if something was going wrong. She understood that if Ben had been the butler, she would have recognized him immediately and none of this would have happened. However, now that she began to think about it more, she noticed more and more strange things. She remembered commenting on Edwin's concern for the horses. Since when can a duke worry about things like this that should be managed by grooms? It didn't matter how good Kirsten was, or why he personally entered into a contract for the mating of horses. Edwin in the book was an incredible politician, but he had little interest in his own family and spent most of his time in the capital. Because of such a son, Lady Brinston had to take over all the family affairs after the Duke's death. Therefore, she decided to take the duchy into her own hands and take care of her son's marriage. Seeing how the Duke remained single and rarely visited the estate, which was gathering dust at that time, she made her own decision. She decided not to leave him behind closed gates, and then did everything to change the situation. She didn't like the closed nature of this house, which had once sparkled and been full of guests. However, it was strange that this man visited the exhibition on behalf of his mother. What changes were supposed to happen to him? Approaching Henri's window, she continued to think about this, without finding answers. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't make the connection. Before any unexpected problems arose, she needed to find out the reasons for these discrepancies. And first of all, why did Albert become the butler when, according to the script, it was supposed to be Ben? She approached again the estate where she was to live in the near future. So she walked arm in arm with Edwin and thought her own thoughts on how to keep herself safe. Now, when she was about to marry this man, she found herself in the very heart of the storm. She was greeted by the acting duchess with all the courtesy she could muster. Henri thanked her, but at that moment some dog jumped out of the maid's hands. She ran straight up to Henri, brushing against her dress, but it didn't bother her at all. She remembered that it was the puppy they called Lady Brinston's precious old son, Brownie. Henri leaned towards him and thought that he was much nicer than she had imagined. While she was happily petting the dog, she didn't notice how people around her were looking at her. Lady Brinston was at first embarrassed, but later she was puzzled, since the dog did not particularly like anyone. She then asked if she had introduced Brownie to her daughter-in-law, to which the Duke paused. And at that moment, Henri realized that she had screwed up because she was not supposed to know the name of the Duchess's dog. Everyone wondered when this situation occurred whether the Duchess had introduced Brownie to her. Holding this little dog in her arms, she simply didn't know what to say and had to make a decision urgently. Then a saving thought came into her head that Lady Chester had told her about him, after which she said that she loved dogs very much. Then she added that her mother doesn't like them, so they never had them. When she asked if the Duchess had a favorite four-legged friend, family members told her about Brownie. The Duchess laughed and noted that her daughter-in-law had such an innocent side. And the contented little dog sat in her arms and had no plans to run away, which was a good sign for her. After that, they sat at a beautifully furnished table with many different delicacies. Everything was simply bursting with activity, and the Duchess said it had been a long time since Alice's estate had been so busy. She asked Henri how her day had gone, noting that she had been told that she had even met the servants. She replied that it was indeed true, they all turned out to be very kind to her. She didn't say that she had any suspicions. She didn't want to ruin the dinner. Besides, everyone was really incredibly kind to her, so there was no point in ruining it with such statements. The Duchess noted that she was pleased to hear this as the hostess of the house. It was true that she looked pleased, but Henri had a feeling that something interesting was about to happen. Looking at the Duchess, she realized that there was a feeling that she was going through an interview. That is, she is assessed as a future daughter-in-law, although this was normal. She could tell from Edwin's expression that he was unaware, for he was acting rather dryly as usual. At the same time, the Duchess, looking at Henri, thought that for someone from the village, she had a very well-trained speech. Although she lacked refinement, her manners were very good. However, she decided to ask one more question, asking about her father. Henri simply replied that he was constantly busy with family affairs, to which she received the answer that it must have been very difficult for her and her stepmother to run the household alone. Henri noted that he regularly maintains contact with them and never neglects them, to which the Duchess said that she, too, had an inattentive husband and did not need her father's protection. Although she added that men love this, they also prefer to devote themselves to business. After that, she asked if she was really so close to Lady Wentworth. It seemed to her that her sister was jealous. Henri thought to herself that she was really clinging to her, but out loud she said that she was her stepmother. Apparently knowing that she would soon leave, she wanted to express all her love. The Duchess thought it was quite a loving family and even felt a pang of envy. However, she nevertheless assumed that before his remarriage, the Viscount had managed to devote a lot of effort to educating his only daughter. Henri replied that she had studied French and history, but at that moment Edwin said that the duck was getting cold, after which he added that they needed to eat while the food was hot. The Duchess was furious in her soul, thinking that he had indeed already chosen his future wife. Ignoring his mother, the Duke noted that he had sent a carriage for Henri's things. She didn't expect it to happen so soon, so she was a little taken aback. The Duchess asked if there might be fragile items there, such as musical instruments, since Henri must have learned to play the piano. It was absolutely clear that the Duchess was trying to find out what other talents her future daughter-in-law possessed. However, the Duke replied that the estate already had everything necessary, and there was no need to make such complicated transportations. His mother tried to object, but the Duke continued his speech and said that Henri preferred art. She was somewhat surprised by this answer, but grateful to him for his attentiveness. The Duchess did not expect this, so she was a little embarrassed. She herself loved paintings. But nevertheless, she was pleased that her daughter-in-law was interested in the same things as she was. After that, she began to speak, testing the waters, but she was distracted. At that moment, a servant came up and the Duchess's maid said that she had an unexpected guest. The guest was welcome, so the Duchess asked that he be brought here immediately. A smartly dressed man appeared and apologized for the sudden visit. He said that he had such good news that it required no delay. Looking at him, Henri realized that she knew this man. She was reading the book carefully. It was Lawrence, an art dealer who found wealthy buyers for artists and their works. He was one of those whom the Duchess, who generously patronized the arts, kept close to her. She asked him if he had good news, to which he replied that it was absolutely so, although the Duchess noted that this time all the works chosen were from one artist. However, Lawrence immediately announced that the newcomer's work had been chosen as the picture of the year, which completely shocked the Duchess. The Royal Academy was choosing the most outstanding works, and it decided that one of the paintings was the best that year and received the greatest glory. Lawrence then added that a nobleman who owns a painting or supports an artist is officially referred to as a man of exceptional taste. Henri immediately congratulated the Duchess. Edwin joined in these words. At the same time, he was amazed by the modesty of his bride, who could say that the choice was hers. But she remained silent, and he was grateful to her. But he remembered how they walked through the exhibition. He then thought that it would probably be worth choosing paintings by other artists. All of those proposed by Henri were by Edward Poynter. However, Henri then stopped him, saying that no one could succeed this artist. She was so confident in herself that he decided to agree with her, after which she said that he should trust her. Looking him straight in the eye, she said that he definitely wouldn't regret it. And now, sitting at the table, he thought that it really was a great choice. His mother said that over the past 20 years, she had been trying to prove her insight in art all the time, and each time it ended in failure. Edwin, whom she had forced to go to the exhibition, was the one who succeeded, although she was furious when he returned with 4 works from one artist. However, she was interrupted by Lawrence's voice, who said that something had happened that had never happened before. A buyer had purchased 5 works from the winner of the Picture of the Year award. The Duchess was shocked because Edwin brought home only 4 paintings. She looked at him questioningly, but he was in no hurry to answer, after which he nevertheless said that all the paintings at this exhibition were chosen by Henri. Lawrence and the Duchess were shocked, but Edwin continued calmly, saying that as a token of his gratitude he had given one to her. Henri knew that this wasn't the best way to tell the news, but what could she do? The next day there was quite an interesting commotion in the castle. All the newspapers were full of news that the artist, famous this year, sold 5 of his works from the exhibition to the Duchess of Brinston. At the same time, all sorts of rumors were circulating in the castle. The maids discussed it while cleaning. His meeting with Henri at the exhibition was discussed by the footmen, who believed that the rumors about his love were true. At the same time, everyone said that this painting was chosen by the Duchess of Wentworth, the Duke's fiancée, and the whole of Eastern Carlton was in an uproar. The Duchess listened with pleasure to the newspapers as they wrote that the Society of the Royal Capital was not only welcoming a new star in the world of art, but was also witnessing the birth of a new family. She noted that this was quite a successful debut for a girl from a village. After that, she addressed her by name, which she could not help but notice. Henri said she didn't deserve such honors. The Duchess was immediately indignant that no amount of embellishment could be excessive for the future Mrs. Brinston. She then added that many people write in the newspapers about who Brinston's Cinderella is now. She then noted that there are still many unnecessary rumors swirling around the family. Everyone wants to know what kind of girl became the future Duchess who will receive such a high title. She noted that many people like to discuss other people, but she expressed this quite interestingly with her facial expressions. Henri thought that her smile at that moment was very similar to Edwin's. The Duchess noted that in any case she has excellent taste and thanks to it she can be in the art world with her head held high, after which she sincerely thanked Henri, who said that it was not worth the gratitude, she was glad to help. She thought to herself that she had been surprised when Edwin had so calmly told her that she had chosen the paintings for you, but who knew it would turn out this way? Here the Duchess noted that the reason for her long journey to the Mayfair estate was not at all to read newspaper articles. She rang the bell, after which people entered the hall. They were maids, but Henri didn't understand why they were there. The housekeeper brought in 2 charming girls who stood with their heads bowed. She stated that they were Lady Henry's maids, whom they had recently hired to assist her. One very excited one said that her name was Agnes, and then said that it was an honor to serve her. The housekeeper added that the girl had graduated from the Carlton Dressmaking Academy and was the best in her class, and then introduced Ebony, who was from a family that had served the Duke's family for generations. Henri was a little taken aback. She had not expected such a reception. Now she had 2 whole maids at her disposal. The girls were quite pleasant in appearance. There was no arrogance or excessive pride in them. However, she did something completely unexpected. She approached the girls and took each of them by the hand, after which she said that she completely relies on them and will do everything possible to become a lady that they can be proud of. This left them completely stunned, but it was a natural impulse that she decided to implement. The Duchess was pleased with this behavior, since she realized that her daughter-in-law was polite even to the servants. At that moment, Henri turned and thanked her for her attention, to which she received a blessedly pleasant response. After this, Henri was informed that it was now time to move on to the next step. The Duchess said that she would be busy every day from today onwards, as there were many urgent matters. If they want to shut the mouths of all the curious people, they need to organize the most grandiose wedding imaginable. Henri was both delighted and horrified. She was not prepared for such events. After some time, the peacefully floating clouds above their castle were unaware of how many worries had fallen on Henri. She fell face down on the bed, not believing that even with so many things done, she still had a whole bunch left to do. Before this, her schedule started at 6 in the morning. She had just gone to bed, and now it was already dawn and time to get up. She was annoyed that Edwin was in such a hurry with the wedding. There was so much to do. However, after that, she decided to relax and understand what she was feeling now. She felt like every day was like she was living in a dream, and then decided that the news had probably already reached her father. Rolling over onto her side, she decided it might be better to stay busy, as it didn't give her time to think about everything. A whole week passed in such turmoil, and she had her first dress fitting. Everyone was delighted, saying that the hem of the dress looked like clouds and that she looked amazing in it. Henri thanked her maid who did the sewing, noting that they put a lot of effort into bringing to life all the latest trends in the capital. At that moment, the butler came in and said that the gentleman wanted to discuss something with her. However, he came in himself and noted that it had been quite difficult to meet her lately, although he had accumulated some questions that he would like to discuss with her before going. She said she was trying on her wedding dress and didn't expect him to come so soon. Standing in front of him, she asked him why he had such a surprised look. However, I didn't expect him to say that this dress was too heavy. The seamstress was simply shocked when he said that all these ribbons were unnecessary, as were the overly voluminous sleeves. Henri replied that it was beautiful and sweet. There couldn't be anything wrong with it. The Duke said that she looked ridiculous. After that, I asked the seamstress to remove some of the decorations and make it simpler, to which she unquestioningly agreed. This made Henri angry. She thought he was being too annoying a jerk, after which he decided to leave. Edwin turned and headed for the exit, as if his only task was to assess her dress. This left not only the women perplexed, even the butler was in some shock. He wanted to tell him that it was not proper to behave in such a way, but due to his master's stern look, he decided to remain silent. At that moment, in one of the living rooms, a woman was sorting through her mail and saw an invitation to a wedding from Princeton. This even made her laugh because we were talking about those who had recently taken the top spots in the newspapers. The woman decided that she wanted to take a look at them, so she absolutely had to go to this event. And then one fine day, when the sun was softly warming and the wind was not swaying the leaves of the trees, Henri stood with the Duke in front of the priest. When he had said the right words at that moment, Edwin turned to Henri to kiss her. She looked at him, not understanding her feelings, as if something strange was about to happen. However, she saw him reach out to touch her. He gently took her cheek, about to touch it with his lips, but at that moment something terrible happened. Someone shouted loudly for him to stop, after which the voice called Henri a little rat. The voice was quite loud and nasty, but it seemed to demand that he return what was his and was very convincing. Together with Edwin, they turned slightly. Behind them stood a lady in a luxurious burgundy dress, holding a sword in her hands. She walked towards them and asked how Henri dared to take away what belonged to her, after which she swung her sword. Henri tried to stop her by grabbing the hilt. The woman said that this little brat did not have enough strength to take the blade from her, but at that moment Henri seemed to have fallen into a looking glass. It was as if she had been drawn into some kind of whirlpool of events where she shouldn't have been. A minute later, she woke up, drenched in sweat and shaking all over. She had been having the same dream for several days in a row. Maybe it was because of the stress before the wedding, but it was still strange. She recalled the moment when the Duke touched her lips, feeling some trepidation. After all, this was supposed to be the first kiss in her life, and it was supposed to happen with a person she didn't love. She was ashamed that this was so. However, she didn't understand why it always ended so terribly. Even when the maid was doing her hair, she thought about it. Knowing the Queen's character and the plot of the book, Henri wondered if she could avoid meeting her while the marriage contract was in effect. The maid became worried and asked if she was not feeling well, since she had a gloomy look since the morning. She replied that everything was fine, just a little anxious, after which she noted that she herself looked tired and that she shouldn't strain herself too much by altering her dress. Henri said that the original design was beautiful as it was, but the maid said that she couldn't leave it as it was, she had to do the best she could. After which the maid Agnes noted that she had no good ideas about the dress, which made her blush with shame. The future Duchess thought for a moment, and then an interesting thought came to her mind. There was little time to create a new outfit, so perhaps it was worth removing the puffy sleeves and unnecessary decoration, but making the skirt more luxurious. She thought to herself that it would be like modern wedding dresses. That is, those who were in her life before entering this world. The maid really liked this idea, so she received it with great admiration. She said that she would immediately go and alter the dress to suit her requirements and rushed off to her room. This day was special. The families of the bride and groom had to meet and get to know each other before the wedding. For this, Henri dressed up. She wanted to look impeccable in front of her father. After that, she tried to remember the name of the footman who passed by. A moment later, she succeeded, calling him Louis and asking if her father had arrived yet, to which she received the answer that he was waiting in the living room. Henri thanked the footman for his answer, smiling rather sweetly. The confused young man said that she looked especially beautiful today. However, at that moment the Duke appeared and called out to the boy in a rude manner. After which, turning to his butler, he said that it was probably worth conducting additional training for the servants. It was unacceptable for servants to allow themselves such free expressions. Albert apologized to the owner for the young man and then sent him to do his duties. He rushed away with such speed that it was obvious that he was very afraid of the wrath of the owner of the house. Henri decided to stand up for him and said that he didn't say anything special, so why was he so angry? The Duke asked if she thought he was angry. He seemed quite impartial to him. After which, a quarrel arose between the young people. The maid did not dare to say a word at that moment. Edwin claimed that he was absolutely sane, and Henri argued with him. Thunderbolts flashed between them, and everyone around was afraid to be in their reach. The Duke decided to interrupt this argument, saying that they first needed to meet her father, who was waiting for them in the drawing room. Albert offered to see them off, breaking out in a cold sweat. Henri thought that the Duke had been in a bad mood since early morning. What could have happened? The maid exhaled, but she understood that this might not be the end of the matter. Her father, overly dressed stepmother, modest Eunice, and bored Candace were already gathered in the living room. When he saw his daughter, the father jumped up and called her by name. He rushed towards her with such ardor that Henri even felt awkward. They hadn't seen each other for 4 months, but her father said he knew she was fine. However, he still asked how she could make such a decision without his knowledge. Henri said out loud that he would strangle her with his embrace, but she thought to herself that he was never home anyway. How could she tell him? After which, giving her father a slight nudge, she said, because he arrived earlier than she expected. He replied that he had left immediately after learning of her wedding. Edwin greeted Lord Wentworth, noting that they had not seen each other for a long time. Father Henri noted that this was the first time they had met outside of Parliament, but said he was very pleased. Henri thought that her mother would be the one to disgrace her the most, but her father also froze her, saying that she was too simple for the Duke, although an alliance of houses would be to his advantage. Some stupid prudence made Henri blush, but the Duke said that his daughter was smart and sensible enough. The father took his daughter by the shoulders and said that, although it was belated, he congratulated her on her wedding. Henri was a little angry that he decided to play the role of a caring father and removed his hand. After all, he really hadn't paid her enough attention since he married her a second time. This behavior infuriated Candace, who tried her best to win her stepfather's love, after which she told him not to be upset because he still had her and Eunice. Henri couldn't help but confirm her words, after which she said that Candace apparently even postponed her wedding to take care of him. It was a bit rude, but it should have put her in her place for the time being, so as not to waste it. At that moment, Eunice thought that she wanted to tell Henri something important, but she could not find the right moment, being too modest. She decided that she would visit her a little later, since she had a small gift. And so she did, knocking on Henri's door with a beautifully wrapped present. She was very happy to see her. She said that she had been waiting for her, after which she called her to come in quickly. Eunice was shocked by the decoration of her room. She did not expect such a grandeur. She also noted that she had a rather beautiful, tastefully furnished room. Henri showed her where she could sit, and then asked why she was waiting for her in the hallway. Eunice replied that she wanted to give her something for the wedding, something that she had made with her own hands. Henri said that she was very glad to meet her, and then asked what about the man from the ball, whether he had sent a letter. She told her to take her gift first. Her hands were shaking from excitement. Eunice said it was a very modest wedding gift, to which Henri replied that she would be glad to receive any. However, her sister exceeded all her expectations. Henri's eyes widened and her heart fluttered when she saw this. It contained a framed picture of little Henri with her mother and father. Everything was drawn so beautifully that Henri caught her breath. She looked at every detail and understood how wonderful it was. Her mother in the picture seemed alive, as if she was about to hug her. After my mother died, my father began to erase all traces of her presence. Her room was closed, all her portraits were removed, and there was only one picture left, painted by an unskilled hand, which remained in Henri's memory. Eunice said that she decided to paint them. Henri was shocked that she had really done it herself, and to all the belittling of her talent, she said that it was divine. Eunice was very embarrassed, proving that she couldn't do it well enough. But for Henri, it was a priceless gift that could not be compared to anything. After which she sincerely thanked her sister, who became embarrassed. She said she was very glad that Henri liked it, because it was from the heart. and she saw that her fingers were all stained with paint, which she couldn't wipe off. And in general, she didn't know that her sister could draw so well. It was a revelation for her. And Eunice recalled how the maid removed the portrait of Henry's mother, which was turned face down. She was sad then, realizing how her younger sister missed her own mother. The idea to paint her with her entire family came to her when she saw a small portrait turned upside down on Henry's table. She realized how bored she was, so she decided to please her. However, she did not say anything. She only congratulated Henri on her wedding and was glad that she was able to please her. The next day was full of events, but one thing threw me off track. The housekeeper came in response to the call, and Henri asked her to bring the list of wedding guests. She said that she would complete the task in the near future, but everything went wrong. The Duke summoned her to him. Apparently, the housekeeper reported to him. He got straight to the point and asked why she needed the guest list. She decided not to reveal her true intentions and said that she would like to check something. Her answer did not satisfy Edwin, so he looked at her with a questioning look. She hesitated and said she was just curious to see if the gentleman Eunice had met would be among the guests. After which she said, could the Duke not ask her about such trifles? Then he told her that the list was on the table, she could check it. Eunice said that this gentleman's name began with the letter U, so she began to diligently search for him. He wrote to his sister that they would see each other again at the Duke of Brinston's wedding. If he has already received an invitation, then he is quite an influential aristocrat. Eunice said he had quite beautiful handwriting, and the paper smelled of perfume. Henri noted that he was apparently very interested in her, since he went to such lengths. After all, even if he scented the letter, that was clearly a green flag, to use slang from a past life, Henri said. She asked Eunice what his name was, and she hesitated. The letter had only the letter U for a signature, so Eunice didn't know it. Henri decided that it was the first letter of the name and began searching through the guest list, going through the William Warne Wades. Then I decided that there were too many of them and too few clues, so it would be impossible to find him. The Duke asked what was going on with her. She told him that she was having trouble finding the right person. He noted that usually if a person hides his name, there are two reasons for this. Henri was surprised by his participation, but quite grateful. The Duke said that either the man was a fraud who wanted to appear more important, or he was so famous that he was better off hiding his name. It was a revelation to Henri, and then she saw on the guest list people with the surname Brenoir. Not only was William there, but also Hergé, the queen who was to be the Duke's wife. Henri was shocked by this discovery, but tried to control herself. However, the Duke asked why she was so surprised. She replied that Prince and Princess Hergé would be there too. When she asked why, he replied that it was a formal invitation. The Brinstons had always been close to the royal family. He then added that he had no particular personal connection with these two, so their presence was unlikely. Then he said that, to be honest, especially from the princess's side. She thought to herself, I hope Hergé doesn't come, otherwise her nightmare will come true. Taking the list from her hands, the Duke said that she could ask him at the wedding who this gentleman was, as he knew most of the unmarried men in the capital. She was grateful to him. He said that if there were no more questions, he would like her to leave his office. This infuriated Henri because she was already ready to leave. There was no need to tell her. She then added that there was something else they needed to discuss. She said she was grateful for yesterday and for today, which surprised him. He decided to clarify what she was talking about. She got offended and said that then she wouldn't say anything. After which she added that in any case she would be glad to see him again, and left him in complete confusion about what was happening, forcing him to think. However, no matter how much he thought about it, he could not remember how he could have earned her gratitude in recent days. However, the wedding day came and many guests arrived. The guests noted that it was still a bit early for roses, but there were a lot of them. But they smelled like roses, and upon closer inspection it was clear that the artificial petals had been scented with flowers. Henri was magnificent in her attire. Her natural beauty could not be spoiled by anything. The whole palace was decorated so beautifully and magnificently that it was evident that luxury was a natural occurrence here. Services flitted between tables that were set up right in the open air. The guests commented that everything was simply magnificent, although they were surprised, since it was the wedding of the Duke of Brinston himself. Some noted that it was a shame that the roses had not yet bloomed, but others noted that perhaps this was intended. The girls said that today, they might see the Duke in his formal uniform, in which he should look simply stunning. Many were sure that he would even be able to outshine the bride because they said that she had recently arrived from the village. Listening to these conversations, Eunice felt uncomfortable and resentful for her sister. She thought that if they had seen Henri in person, they would never have spoken like that. At that moment, she ran into a young man who greeted her. It was the man from the ball. He asked her if she had been waiting for him for too long, coughing nervously into his fist. After which, blushing, he said that he had been looking for her everywhere. But there were so many people, Eunice hastened to assure him that everything was fine. He congratulated her on this significant event, and she promised to convey this to Henri. However, at this time, Candace's nasty voice was heard behind her, and she pulled Eunice up. She asked her who this young man was. The sister was confused. The gentleman greeted the elder and said that he was glad to meet her, after which he said a number of other polite things but did not give his name. Candace noticed this and didn't like it, just like she didn't like any of her younger sister's choices. She decided that he considered them unworthy of presentation. After that, she said that they were from the bride's side. They still had a lot of things to do, after which she pulled Eunice along with her. The gentleman wanted to talk some more, but Eunice could not resist her older sister, and she took her away. Along the way, she tried to resist, but the evil Candace could not be defeated. The man remained standing alone, looking after her. He expected a little more from this meeting. Eunice turned to face him, but Candace told her to come to her senses. She noticed that a man like him was not her equal, and besides, the only good thing about him was his handsome face. She also reminded them that the ceremony was about to begin and they needed to be present. At that moment, the sound of footsteps was heard. The Duke was about to approach the altar. He was indeed wearing a dress uniform, which emphasized his beauty, making him dazzlingly brilliant. All the women were amazed to see the young Duke in such a guise. He walked towards the priest, not paying attention to anyone, but nevertheless feeling quite tired. From early morning, he had a lot of troubles, and not a minute of free time, which made itself felt. The Duke decided that perhaps the festive reception should be shortened so as not to waste so much time on it. At that moment, a carriage arrived that was supposed to bring his bride. In harness were Kirsten and his beloved, who became the reason for the meeting of the two young people. Father Henri held out his hand, waiting for her to come out. However, no one expected her to be so beautiful, with her pink hair and tasteful jewelry. Her father looked at her with a loving gaze, and she walked as if she couldn't believe that this had happened. Nevertheless, she felt such excitement, which was slightly diminished when she saw the Duke's eyes. He looked at her dumbfounded since he had made adjustments to the previous dress. He had not seen a new one. However, the guests were also shocked by how beautiful the Duke's bride was. He stood, waiting for her to come, realizing that it had become too quiet around him. It was as if no one dared breathe while such a beautiful girl walked down the aisle. The father handed Henri over to her future husband, feeling reverent affection for his daughter. She was truly beautiful, but she didn't notice that someone else was watching them. The priest had not yet told everyone to take their seats, and the observer thought that the girl with light pink hair looked original. The servant of God announced with his thunderous voice that the wedding ceremony was beginning. The observer decided that the new Lady Brinston was surprising in everything. At the same time, the conversation turned to the outfit and origin, but at that moment, the wedding ceremony had already begun. The priest announced that everyone had gathered to witness the sacred union concluded before the face of the Lord. After which he said that marriage is not only joy and happiness. At that moment, the Duke looked towards Henri. Her eyes were downcast as he spoke the words that it was also about supporting each other in difficult and sad times. The Duke thought that was a rather nice description of a contractual union. After this, he also said that the bride and groom should exchange their vows. Henri extended her hand, and the Duke removed her glove. He noted in passing that her hands were so hot as if she was very nervous. Henri, looking at him, wondered why he was hesitating and with such a stern expression on his face. At that moment, he finally put the wedding ring on her finger, which became a symbol of their marriage. She felt the warmth of his hands, which made her even more embarrassed. After that, she asked him a question that had been tormenting her for a long time, considering how much attention he had shown to this subject. She asked him if he liked her dress, worried, and by the way, he justified her worry. He told her directly that he liked it, which left her in a state of surprise. So she asked him why he was so cold then. If he didn't like something, he had to say it straight out. He replied that it wasn't that. After that, she put the ring on his hand, and when she finished, he felt a light touch. It was as if he was trying to hold her hand with his own, not letting go. At that moment, the priest pronounced them husband and wife in the name of the Lord, and the ceremony and solemn part were over. It was at this moment that the Duke leaned over to her and said that, on the contrary, she was very beautiful, and she remembered that she had seen this moment many times in her dreams. She was scared. Would they really kiss now? It was even more embarrassing than in her dreams. The Duke reached out to her, but here she experienced great disappointment. Her eyes widened. She couldn't believe it was happening. That is, she expected anything, but not this. She did not understand how this was even possible. It was too weird a kiss even for a first one, because he didn't just miss. He deliberately kissed her on the cheek, that is, deprived her of a wedding kiss. Henri looked at him, not understanding what was happening. However, there was no time to get angry. The wedding reception had already begun. Henri changed into the dress that was originally made for her and greeted the guests with Edwin. She thought to herself that her first kiss should not have ended like this, because she even had a little hope. On the other hand, when she had to leave anyway, it wouldn't matter, but couldn't she dream at least once? And where in the end she was supposed to have a chance to kiss Edwin again, he looked at her and thought why she was angry, because out of politeness he didn't even touch her lips. After which he said that he needed to step away for a while. There were some orders for Albert. Henri decided that she could use some champagne to refresh herself, as the day had been very difficult. At that moment, women who wanted to approach her were discussing her behind her back. They congratulated her on her marriage and said that her dress was absolutely stunning. After which they added that it was no wonder that the Duke of Brinston was so captivated by her beauty. One of them even asked if it was really her idea to do this dress, because in her opinion it looked great. It was a daring neckline, luxurious embellishments, a truly amazing design. Many have noted that the Duchess, who received her title in an unconventional way, chooses her style accordingly. For an ordinary lady, such a bold choice would be impossible, but all women would like to do this. The guest noted that her name is not just thundering around for no reason, she is truly exceptional. Henri thought to herself that this was rather rude for a first meeting, and then asked what their names were. The women apologized for not introducing themselves, and the Marchioness of Rosley immediately said her name and curtsied. Henri noted that this dress was created thanks to the generous support of the Duke and Dowager Duchess. Isn't it incredibly beautiful? This was from the category, the husband and mother-in-law approved. What business could she have with others? The Marquise replied that she was glad that she valued her husband's taste so highly. Henri continued to play her part and said that this dress was supposed to be her wedding dress, but her family convinced her that it was too simple, and she sighed, doing it in such a caricatured way that everyone understood that she was the favorite of the family. Everyone was so confused, but she remembered that Edwin himself asked him to redo it. At the same time, the girls asked who her seamstress was and began to fervently ask her to introduce them, because they too would have weddings in the future. All the girls just surrounded her and started asking a lot of questions. From the outside, it looked quite interesting. Henri realized that she had achieved what she wanted. Now all the girls would try to ask him for advice. However, they were again being watched from the sidelines, and the look was not the most favorable. At this moment, his mother looked at Edwin and thought that he could be more attentive to social life. She called out to him and said that if he ended the reception too early, it would reflect badly on his wife's reputation. She needs to strengthen her position, even though they are on their honeymoon. The Duchess noted that he was terribly stubborn, but he nevertheless ordered that all the festivities be finished before sunset. His mother was confused because before she had finished speaking, he had already walked away. He wanted to approach his wife, who should not be left alone for too long, but his way was blocked. One of the guests decided to congratulate him directly on his wedding, but the men's clothing was apparently hiding something other than a man. The Duke asked the name of the man congratulating him, and he replied that he had forgotten to introduce himself. He then added that His Majesty had granted him the title of Count, and that the Duke might not have heard of him, since he was originally from abroad. He then added that he is involved in art, educational programs, and exhibitions. The Duke said he thanked him for his congratulations, calling him by name. He introduced himself as Count Brolin, but he said that the Duke could simply call him Evans. Edwin had long since realized who it was, but he could not understand what kind of game she was starting. When she extended her hand to shake his, he thought she still had her strange sense of humor. However, he needed to shake her hand, but she simply slapped it. He thought that it was unclear why she appeared here, but it did not concern him. However, she was clearly playing some kind of game, claiming that she was actually more interested in his wife. Edwin, who was about to leave, suddenly stopped. He turned sharply and asked what Count Brawley meant by that. He raised his hands in a conciliatory tone and said that he meant her fine sense of beauty, nothing bad. After which he stated that he would like to meet her. This woman thought to herself that as soon as she showed irritation, his tone instantly changed. He said that nothing would come of it and wished her all the best. She continued to insist and said that if the project was successful, it would also benefit his wife, but he replied that they did not need that. She then turned to threats and said that if he really cared about his wife, he would understand that her offer would be worth considering. Moreover, there were notes of threat in her voice. She said that he could not help but hear that her origins were being discussed in high society. The Duke decided to put a stop to this and said that Earl Brawley was overstepping his bounds. He laughed and said that he just needed to introduce himself. The Duke thought that she was too persistent. It was unclear why she dressed up in a man's suit to get close to Henri, but if he couldn't get rid of her, let him at least see the meeting. After which he said that the Count could invite his wife to one dance. He immediately thanked the Duke, but the latter noted that if his wife refused and he continued to insist, the conversation would end differently. The Count replied that he was not one to impose himself, thinking that he had already wasted too much time, longer than he should have left his new wife alone. As he left, his face was reflected in the eyes of Count Brawley, who suddenly realized something interesting. It seemed to him that the Duke really loved his wife because even while talking to her, he continued to look in her direction. She must have said it out loud, because the Duke turned around, grabbed her by the tie, and told her that he was not the most patient of men. He added that he had been showing leniency for long enough. The confused Count said that if he had offended him, he asked for forgiveness. The Duke threw him aside, turned sharply, and went to his wife. The woman understood that he seemed to recognize her, but still behaved so provocatively. Although this trip was indeed not in vain, she was able to find out some things. The Duke finally had a weak spot that could not be found before. This was his new wife, for whose sake he was ready to be insolent to the Queen. That is, this girl with pink hair managed to conquer him, which means she can become a reason for manipulation.